Hello everyone. I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The quiet contagion, the loop. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My life runs on imprecise rhythms. As a freelance audio editor, my days are governed not by the clock, but by the waveform. I hunt for the tiny imperfections, the fractional hesitation in a CEO's corporate address, the rustle of a script in a podcast recording, the subtle pop of a plosive that ruins an otherwise perfect take. I live in the microscopic spaces between sounds, in the silent syntax of speech. My apartment, a second-floor walk-up in Fitzroy North, is my soundproofed sanctuary, insulating me from the chaotic orchestra of Melbourne. From here, I could stitch together a flawless reality, one clean audio file at a time. It was a comfortable illusion. The first thread to unravel was Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson lived across the street in a meticulously kept terrace house, the kind with iron lacework on the veranda and a garden gnome standing sentinel by the roses. He was a retiree, a quiet man whose existence was, to me, little more than a series of silent, distant gestures, collecting his mail, watering his plants, polishing his front doorknob. My erratic work schedule meant I was often awake at dawn, nursing a mug of tea and staring out the window as the sky bled from charcoal to violet. That's when I first noticed it. On a Tuesday, his front door opened. My laptop's clock read 7:08 a.m. He stepped out, locked the door with a single, efficient turn of the key, and set off down the street. An old man's routine. Nothing more. On Wednesday, I was rendering a large file, the progress bar crawling across the screen. I glanced at the clock. 7 hours 7 minutes and 58 seconds, 2 seconds later, Mr. Henderson's door opened. He stepped out, locked it, and walked away. The timing was neat. By Saturday, it had become a fixation. I set a silent alarm on my phone for 7:07 a.m. I stood by my window, my own breath fogging the cool glass. On the weekend, surely, the routine would break. But no. At 7:08 a.m., to the second, the door opened. The lock turned. The walk began. It wasn't around 7:08. It wasn't 7:08 and a few seconds. It was perfect. A digital, inhuman precision buried in the analog life of an old man. I tried to dismiss it. Obsessive-compulsive, perhaps. A lonely man clinging to structure. My own brain, attuned to spotting patterns, was probably manufacturing significance where there was none. I was tired, over-caffeinated, living a life too far inside my own head. I told myself to forget it. But the world seemed intent on reminding me. My morning ritual, when I chose to engage with the outside world, involved a walk to a small cafe on Brunswick Street called Ground Note. The coffee was good, but the real draw was the comfortable anonymity. Chloe, the barista, was a fixture. Piercings, a sleeve tattoo of tangled wisteria, and a perpetually weary but friendly smile. The usual, Long night, she'd ask. It was her standard greeting for me, a comfortable little call-in response. One Monday, she said it as she wiped down the counter. The usual, Long night. The cadence was familiar, the tilt of her head, the slight pause. The rhythm of a phrase spoken 100 times. On Tuesday, I walked in, and the scene was identical. She was wiping the same spot on the counter. She looked up at the exact moment my shadow fell across the doorway. The usual, Long night. It wasn't just the same words. It was the same performance. The pitch, the inflection, the timing, it was a flawless playback. My audio editor's brain recoiled. It was like hearing an audio sample triggered, not a person speaking. On Wednesday, I decided to break it. I walked in, and before she could speak, I said, "Just a long black today, thanks Chloe." The effect was jarring. She froze, her hand hovering over the portafilter. Her friendly smile didn't vanish, it just locked. Her eyes held a flicker of profound, system-level confusion, like a computer receiving an unexpected command. It lasted only a second, maybe two, but in that space, she wasn't Chloe. She was something else. A vacant vessel. Then, she blinked. The smile softened into something more genuine, more human. Oh. Right. Sure. Long black. Coming right up. She seemed flustered, her movements suddenly less fluid. The rest of the transaction was normal, but the image of that momentary blankness was seared into my mind. I had pulled out a wire, and for a second, the machine had sputtered. I started walking more, trying to clear my head, trying to escape the feeling that the walls of my own perception were closing in. I'd wander through the Fitzroy Gardens, losing myself in the green expanse, a place that felt organic and untamed. But even there, the glitches followed. It was the traffic lights. Specifically, the pedestrian crossing on Victoria Parade, where the gardens met the city's edge. The sound it made was a rapid, high-pitched ticking. I timed it one day, out of the same obsessive curiosity that had hooked me on Mr. Henderson. I used the stopwatch on my phone. From the moment the green man started flashing to the moment he turned red, exactly 10 seconds. The ticking was a perfect 120 beats per minute, a metronomic precision that felt unnatural for a piece of weathered public infrastructure. The next day, I crossed at the same spot. I started the stopwatch again. 10 seconds. 120 BPM. Flawless. A week later, I found myself waiting there again. A mother and her young son stood beside me. The boy was fidgeting, tugging at her hand. "Mummy, why does the green man run so fast?" he asked. "So we know when to stop, sweetie," she replied, pulling him back from the curb. The light changed. The ticking started. I held my breath. The boy began to run in place, mimicking the flashing green figure. Tick, 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 he chanted, perfectly in time with the signal. The light turned red. The boy stopped. "He's tired now," he said, matter-of-factly. His mother smiled, but I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. The boy wasn't just mimicking it, he was synchronized to it. It was a shared rhythm, an accepted, unnoticed piece of the city's looped song. These things were pebbles in my shoe, tiny and persistent irritants. A man's punctuality. A barista's greeting. A traffic light's rhythm. Individually, they were nothing. Quirks. Coincidences. The mundane ephemera of urban life. I was a sound editor, I reminded myself. I find patterns for a living. I was imposing order on chaos because it was my job. But the feeling wouldn't go away. The feeling that I was hearing a playback, not a live performance. That the city was a recording, and someone, somewhere, had started looping the tracks. The silence in my apartment was no longer a sanctuary, it was the space between the repetitions, the only place I could be sure the track wasn't playing. But when I stepped outside, I was stepping back into the groove. And the needle was dropping on the same spot, again and again and again. My work began to suffer. I'd listen to a voiceover, and the speaker's natural, human imperfections, the very things I was paid to remove, started to sound like errors in a larger, more sinister code. A slight lisp wasn't a speech impediment, it was a corrupted file. A breath taken at an odd moment was a lag in the system. I started taking late-night drives. Aimless journeys through the sleeping suburbs, hoping the sheer randomness of the road would shake the feeling. One night, cruising through Kew, I saw it. A council worker, illuminated by the sodium orange of a streetlight, was scrubbing graffiti off a brick wall. It was a strange symbol, a simple circle with a vertical line breaking its top edge. Like a minimalist power button. The worker was diligent, his movements practiced and efficient. I drove on. The next night, I took the same route. I don't know why. A strange compulsion. As I passed the same spot, my headlight swept across the brick wall. It was clean. Of course it was. But a week later, I drove by again. The symbol was back. Not a new one, not a similar one. It was identical. The same position, the same size, the same faint drip of paint running from the bottom curve of the circle. I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding to a halt in the empty street. I got out, my heart hammering. I walked up to the wall, the cold night air sharp in my lungs. I touched the paint. It was dry, fused to the brick. It was real. But it was impossible. I thought back to the council worker. His practiced, efficient movements. The memory replayed in my head, but now it had a new, horrifying quality. His motions hadn't just been practiced. They'd been rhythmic. Repetitive. Looped. I got back in my car and drove home, the streets of Melbourne feeling alien and menacing. The comfortable illusion of my life was gone, stripped away to reveal something cold and mechanical underneath. The quiet contagion wasn't a sickness spreading through people. It was a change in the nature of reality itself. And the unsettling mundane was no longer mundane. It was a warning. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The world had become a spreadsheet of uncanny data points. My rationalizations wore thin, then tore completely. Coincidence could no longer bear the weight of such perfect, recurring symmetry. I bought a new notebook, a sturdy moleskine with a black cover, and began what I called my log of the mundane. It was my only anchor in a sea of creeping regularity. 7 hours and 8 minutes, H departs. Weather, overcast. No variation. 9 hours 22 minutes and 15 seconds, cafe. C, greeting protocol initiated. Query, the usual, L. Long night. Tone/inflection, 100% match to previous instances. 16 hours 17 minutes and 30 seconds, Yarra Tram, Route 86. Rattles past window. Duration of audible sound, 12.4 seconds. Consistent. 21 hours and 50 minutes, neighbors upstairs. Sound of dropped object, likely a book. Same muffled thud, same time, every weekday. The act of documenting it felt both insane and profoundly necessary. It was proof. Not for anyone else, but for me. Proof that I wasn't losing my mind, but that the world I was meticulously recording was losing its soul. The paper was my witness. The isolation was the worst part. It grew in proportion to my certainty. The more convinced I became, the more alien I felt. My only real friend in the city was Liam, a graphic designer I'd known since university. We met for a beer once a week at the Napier, a classic Fitzroy pub with a stuffed lioness above the bar. It was our ritual, but now the word itself made me flinch. I tried to broach the subject. I had to. The pressure of it was becoming unbearable. Have you ever noticed, I began, trying to sound casual as I swirled my beer, how things seem a bit repetitive lately? Liam took a long sip of his pale ale. It's called a routine, mate. You should try it. Might do you some good. Get you out of that dark little cave you call an office. No, not like that, I pressed, leaning forward. I mean, unnaturally repetitive. Perfectly so. Like, listen to the bartender. I nodded towards the bar, where a man with a formidable beard was wiping the counter. Watch his hands. He does that same 3-swipe pattern, then taps the rag on the sink, every single time. He just did it 2 minutes ago. Liam watched for a moment. The bartender finished a transaction, picked up his cloth, and performed the exact sequence, swipe, 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 tap. Liam shrugged. Muscle memory. He's been doing this job for years. It's efficient. But it's perfect, I insisted, my voice rising. It's to the millisecond. And it's not just him. It's everywhere. The traffic lights, people on the street, Chloe at ground note. He put his beer down and looked at me, his expression shifting from amusement to concern. "Elle, are you okay? You seem stressed. Work getting to you?" "It's not stress, Liam. It's real. The world is looping. Small parts of it, but it's happening." He sighed, a look of pity in his eyes that was worse than any argument. "Okay, mate. Looping. Right. Look, maybe you've just been cooped up too long. All that sound editing, listening to the same 10 seconds of audio over and over. It's probably bleeding into how you see things. You're projecting." Every word was a brick in the wall being built between us. He wasn't just dismissing me, he was diagnosing me. My greatest skill, my ear for detail and rhythm, was being turned into a symptom of my own insanity. I tried to bring up Mr. Henderson, the graffiti, the impossible perfection of it all, but I could see his eyes glazing over. I was the rambling lunatic in the corner of the pub. I dropped it, and we finished our beers in a strained silence, the comfortable rhythm of our friendship broken. I walked home alone, the chasm of my isolation wider and deeper than ever before. My nights became a feverish trawl through the dark corners of the internet. I used every search term I could imagine: unnatural repetition, city feels like a loop, people saying the same thing every day, reality glitch, urban déjà vu. The results were a desolate landscape of human anxiety. I found old forum posts from a decade ago, a user named Observer79 on a paranormal message board describing a similar phenomenon in Seattle before being shouted down as a schizophrenic. There were articles on mass hysteria, shared delusions, the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon. But none of it fit. This wasn't a trick of the mind. This was a property of the world. It was too precise, too physical. That's when the graffiti became my focus. It was the one element that was demonstrably, physically impossible. People's actions could be explained away as habit, sounds as mechanical regularity. But a painted symbol that reappeared on a clean wall defied all logic. It was the key. The symbol, that circle with the vertical break, became my obsession. I started calling it the breach mark. I began to see it everywhere, a subtle signature on the looping reality. A tiny one etched into the metal frame of a park bench. A faint, almost invisible one on the spine of a book in a second-hand shop window. A large, bold one on the side of a concrete pylon under the Eastern Freeway. It seemed to appear along paths of routine. My route to the cafe. My walking path through the gardens. The roads I drove at night. It was as if it was tracing the grooves of the record. This led me to the secondary mystery, the red herring that would consume me for weeks. I noticed that the breach marks often appeared near new 5G cell towers. A paranoid thought, born of late-night conspiracy forums, took root. Was this some kind of broadcast? A neurological signal rewriting our neural pathways, forcing us into these loops for some unknown purpose of social control or mass experiment? The idea was both terrifying and, in a strange way, comforting. It gave the phenomenon a source, a tangible, human-made cause. I bought a cheap EMF meter and started my own pathetic, one-man investigation. I'd walk the streets at night, holding the buzzing device, looking like a ghost hunter searching for a signal. I'd stand beneath the cell towers, watching the meter spike. I'd hold it up to walls where the breach mark appeared, hoping for a reading, a clue. Nothing. The readings were normal, consistent with any dense urban environment. The theory was a dead end, a comforting fiction that fell apart under the slightest scrutiny. It wasn't technology acting upon us. It felt older, more fundamental. My world shrank. I stopped going to ground note. I avoided the Napier. I took different routes through the city, trying to find paths that weren't yet encoded. But the loop was expanding. It was no longer just small gestures or phrases. I'd see a cyclist have a near miss with a pedestrian at an intersection, the screech of tires, the shouted curse. 2 days later, I'd see the exact same event, a perfect reenactment, with the same cyclist and same pedestrian, neither of whom seemed to find the encounter at all familiar. Conversations in cafes became unbearable. I'd overhear snippets, only to hear the same snippets repeated verbatim 20 minutes later by a different group of people at a different table. It was like the city had a limited script, and its cast of extras were all reading from the same few pages. One afternoon, seeking refuge, I went to the state library. The sheer volume of unique, individual thought contained in that building felt like it had to be an antidote. I sat in the grand, domed La Trobe reading room, the silence a balm. I watched the other patrons, the students hunched over laptops, the researchers poring over ancient texts. For a while, it felt normal. Then I saw her. A woman sitting a few tables away, her back to me. She was writing furiously in a notebook, her pen scratching across the page. Every so often, she would stop, look up at the ornate ceiling, and then scribble again. There was an urgency to her that felt familiar. After about an hour, she packed her bag and left. On a whim, I walked over to her empty seat. She had left a piece of paper behind, a crumpled page torn from her notebook. My heart pounded as I picked it up. It was covered in notes, written in a spidery, frantic hand. Tram 96, 1142. Russell St. Stop. Woman W/red scarf drops glove. Man in suit picks it up. Sequence repeats at 12:19, 12:56. Pigeon flock, Federal Square. Take flight pattern synchronized to fountain jets. Flawless timing. Flinders St. clock. Second hand stutters at 33 seconds. Every minute. And in the margin, circled several times, was a sketch. A perfect, hand-drawn breech mark. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't alone. There was someone else. Another observer. I folded the note, my hands shaking, and ran out of the library, scanning the crowds on Swanston Street, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. But she was gone. For the first time in months, I felt a sliver of hope. I wasn't crazy. But as I stood there, clutching her note, a new, colder fear began to settle in. If there were two of us, were we the only ones? Or were we just the next stage of the pattern? Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The note from the library woman, I decided to call her Anya, a name that felt as spectral as her brief appearance, was both a key and a curse. It validated my reality, but it also plunged me deeper into the labyrinth. For days, I revisited the library, hoping to find her again, but she was gone. All I had was her list of observations, a mirror to my own log. Her data points were more poetic than mine, pigeon flocks, a stuttering clock hand, but they sang the same horrifying song. I decided to stop observing passively and start interacting. I had to test the boundaries of the system, to see how it would react to a deliberate disruption. My first target was Mr. Henderson. The next morning, I was waiting. Not in my window, but on the pavement across the street. The air was cool and damp. At 7:07 and 50 seconds a.m., I crossed the road and stood directly in the middle of his front path, my arms crossed, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. 7 hours and 8 minutes, the door opened. Mr. Henderson stepped out, turned to lock the door, and then faced forward. He took one step, then another, his gaze fixed on some point far beyond me. He did not seem to see me. He was on his programmed path. He took a third step, and a fourth, until he was less than a foot away from me. And then he stopped. He didn't react. He didn't say, "Excuse me." His expression didn't change from its usual placid blankness. He simply paused. His body froze mid-stride, one foot slightly raised. He was a statue. A video player with the pause button pressed. The silence was absolute, broken only by a distant siren and my own ragged breathing. I stood there for a full minute, locked in this bizarre standoff with a human automaton. Slowly, deliberately, I stepped to my right, clearing his path. The instant I was out of his way, the system resumed. He completed his step, his foot landing silently on the pavement, and continued his walk down the street at his precise, unvarying pace. He didn't glance at me. He didn't acknowledge the minute-long interruption in his existence. The glitch was corrected, the program running smoothly once more. I leaned against his brick fence, feeling sick. He wasn't a man with a habit. He was a script. And I was an obstacle in the code. The nature of the threat was becoming clearer, and it was far more terrifying than any conspiracy. This wasn't a toxin or a mind control ray. It felt like a fundamental property of physics, as if I had been granted the ability to see the universe's source code and found it to be a cheap, buggy piece of software. The loops were routines, subroutines running on a loop. If time equals 7 hours and 8 minutes, then execute h_departure.exe. The breach mark was the true mystery. It wasn't just a tag, it was an artifact. It broke the rules. My obsession with it led me to stake out the pylon under the freeway where I'd seen the largest one. I chose a night with a clear sky, armed with a thermos of coffee and a pair of binoculars. I watched as a council cleaning crew arrived, not with scrubbing brushes, but with a high-pressure hose. They blasted the concrete pillar, stripping away layers of grime and graffiti. The breach mark vanished under the onslaught of water and chemical cleaner. They finished their work and left. The pillar was pristine, a blank canvas of pale gray concrete. I waited. I watched the moon trace its slow arc across the sky. The city's hum subsided to a low murmur. My world narrowed to that single concrete pillar. And then, as the first hint of dawn tainted the eastern sky, it happened. It wasn't a quick appearance. It was a slow resolution. For a split second, the surface of the pillar seemed to shimmer, to pixelate. Then, like a ghost image burning onto a screen, the breach mark resolved itself back into existence. It didn't drip, it wasn't painted. It simply was. One moment, the concrete was clean, the next, the symbol was there, an integral part of its structure. My theory solidified into a terrible certainty. This wasn't a simulation being projected onto reality. This was the reality. A base layer of existence that was, for some reason, looping and glitching. The breach mark wasn't a message from another person. It was an error message from the system itself. A symbol for break or interrupt or, as I'd first thought, power. The point where the code was fractured. The stakes escalated. The loops began to bleed into one another, creating grotesque hybrids. I saw the woman with the red scarf drop her glove, as per Anya's note, but this time it was Mr. Henderson who stooped to pick it up, his movements fluidly integrating this new action into his own morning loop before he continued on his unblinking way. The system was learning, patching itself, weaving its routines together into a more complex, seamless tapestry of unlife. The glitches when I disrupted the loops became more pronounced. I tried ordering a different coffee from Chloe again. This time, her vacant stare lasted longer, and her hand began to twitch, a tiny, repetitive spasm. Her mouth opened and closed silently, as if trying to access a corrupted voice file. The other patrons in the cafe didn't notice, or rather, their programming didn't allow them to notice. They continued their own looped conversations, oblivious to the sputtering NPC in their midst. I fled, leaving my coffee unpaid for, the sight of her silent, twitching form more horrifying than any monster. And then I found Anya. Or rather, she found me. I was in the Fitzroy Gardens, sitting on the bench where I had first seen the small, etched breach mark. I was sketching it in my log, trying to understand its geometry. It's a broken circle, isn't it? The voice made me jump. I looked up to see the woman from the library. She was standing in front of me, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder, her expression one of intense, knowing seriousness. "You're the one who left the note," I said, my voice hoarse. "And you're the one who reads them," she replied, a faint, wry smile touching her lips. She sat down beside me, not too close, but within the circle of conspiracy. "I'm Anya." Relief washed over me in a dizzying wave. "Elias." I thought I was the only one. "You're never the only one," she said, her gaze distant. "There are always observers." For 3 days, it was a revelation. We met in secret, in places we'd identified as having low-level loop activity. We shared our logs, our theories. She had been aware of it for longer than I had, since she'd moved to Melbourne 6 months ago. She believed it was an extra-dimensional bleed-through, that another reality with a different set of physical laws was slowly overriding our own. The loops were the first stage, the imposition of a more rigid, deterministic existence. She was brilliant, sharp, and her presence was a balm to my frayed sanity. We were two sane people in a world gone quietly mad. We were a team. The alliance was proven false on the 4th day. We were in Carlton Gardens, watching a looped event she had discovered, a busker playing the same 3 chords on a guitar over and over, while a child tossed the same coin into his case every 2 minutes. "It's getting stronger," Anya said, scribbling in her notebook. "The loops are consolidating." I glanced at her page. She was writing the same sentence, over and over. "The loops are consolidating. The loops are consolidating." "Anya?" I said, my blood running cold. She didn't look up. "The system is reinforcing its subroutines." I looked at her face. Her eyes had that telltale vacancy. That placid, unseeing stare. She wasn't talking to me. She was reciting a line. I grabbed her notebook. I flipped back through the pages. Her neat, frantic notes from the days before were there. But as I flipped further, I found pages and pages of the same sketched breach mark. And further back, the same sentences repeated endlessly. "Woman W/red scarf drops glove. Man in suit picks it up." It hit me with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't an ally. She wasn't another observer. She was part of it. A more complex loop. A routine designed to find and engage with anomalies like me. The Anya Protocol. A honeypot for the sane. Her discoveries, her theories, her camaraderie, it was all a script. The most sophisticated, cruel, and convincing loop I had yet encountered. She stopped writing and turned to look at me, her head tilting at a familiar angle. The usual, L. Long night. It was Chloe's line. The same inflection. The same timing. A line of code copied and pasted. I stumbled backwards, dropping her notebook. My hope, which had been so fragile and so precious, shattered into a million pieces. I wasn't a co-conspirator. I was a bug being analyzed by the system. I ran. I ran from the gardens, from the busker, from the hollow shell of the woman I had thought was my salvation. I was more alone than ever, not just an observer of the machine, but a rat in its maze. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The Anya Protocol broke me. For days, I didn't leave my apartment. I sat in the soundproofed silence, the logbook lying open and mocking on my desk. The silence was no longer a refuge, it was the hum of the operating system in standby. The loops weren't just outside anymore, they were inside my head. Was my investigation a loop? My shock, my despair, were they pre-written responses? My entire personality, my obsessive need to find patterns, had made me the perfect subject for this thing. I had to do something that wasn't in my nature. Something the system couldn't anticipate from my profile. My profile was that of an observer, a documenter, a passive victim. I had to become an actor. I had to stop trying to understand the loop and instead, confront the engine that drove it. The breach mark. It was the only way. An error message. A system interrupt. I wasn't going to just observe it anymore. I was going to use it. My confrontation wouldn't be with a person or a creature. It would be with the architecture of reality itself. I chose the largest, most public breach mark I knew, the one on the side of the iconic Flinders Street station, overlooking the tram-filled intersection that was the city's beating, repetitive heart. I gathered my tools. Not a crowbar or a can of paint, but the tools of my own trade. I took my best portable audio recorder, a pair of high-fidelity headphones, and a small, powerful tactile transducer, a device that could turn any surface into a speaker by vibrating it with an audio signal. My plan was born of a desperate, half-insane leap of logic. If this reality was a program, a kind of recording, then its glitches might respond to the right input signal. I couldn't rewrite the code, but maybe I could play it a new sound. I digitized a high-resolution photo of the breach mark. In my editing software, I converted the image into a sound wave, a process called sonification. The stark black and white geometry of the broken circle became a harsh, complex audio file, a low, resonant hum overlaid with a sharp, cutting frequency spike where the line broke the circle. It was the sound of a system error. The sound of a clean signal being broken. That night, I went to Flinders Street Station. The area was a thrumming hive of loops. Trams arriving and departing with inhuman punctuality. The same group of tourists asking for directions from a placidly smiling transport officer. The low, rhythmic murmur of 1,000 conversations that never truly went anywhere. I felt like a ghost, the only living thing in a diorama of ghosts. I found the mark on a sandstone wall near the station's main steps. It was large, almost a meter high, and seemed to thrum with a latent energy that only I could perceive. My hands were sweating, my breath catching in my chest. This was it. The culmination of my descent into madness, or my one chance to push back. I pressed the flat metal plate of the transducer firmly against the center of the symbol. I plugged it into my recorder, put on my headphones, and took a deep, shuddering breath. I hit play. The sound that erupted through the transducer was not the harsh buzz I'd heard in my headphones. It was a deep, resonant tone, a bass note that vibrated not through the air, but through the stone itself. It felt like I had struck a tuning fork the size of the city. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The world didn't shatter. It de-resolved. The relentless, metronomic ticking of the city, the trams, the lights, the footsteps, stuttered and went silent. The transport officer, mid-smile, froze. The tourists' mouths hung open, their question unfinished. The looping audio of the city was silenced. For a single, silent, horrifying moment, the illusion dropped entirely. The familiar yellow facade of Flinders Street Station flickered, and for a split second, I saw what lay beneath, a shimmering wireframe of pale green light, a complex geometric blueprint. The sky, a uniform blanket of dark cloud, dissolved into a cascading grid of what looked like hexadecimal code. The faces of the people around me went utterly blank, their features smoothing over into mannequin-like voids before their programmed expressions could be re-rendered. I had done more than poke the operating system. I had triggered a full system crash. The transducer in my hand grew impossibly hot, and I snatched it away with a cry of pain. The deep tone ceased. And as quickly as it had fallen apart, reality rebooted. The sound of the city rushed back in, but it was wrong. The transport officer's smile resumed, but it was lopsided. The tram arrived, but its bell was a fraction of a second late, a discordant, clumsy clang. The loops were back, but they were corrupted. The perfect, polished performance was now a shambling, amateur rehearsal. The breach mark on the wall flickered once, then faded into the sandstone, gone. I had closed the error window. I stumbled away from the station, melting into the now disjointed flow of the city. I had survived. I hadn't escaped, but I had changed the terms of my imprisonment. Now, weeks later, I live in the aftermath. The city is almost normal. To anyone else, it's just Melbourne, with its quirks and its rhythms. But I see the seams. I am the man who knows. Mr. Henderson still leaves his house every morning, but sometimes it's at 7 hours 8 minutes and 12 seconds, sometimes at 7 hours 9 minutes and 3 seconds. His perfection is broken. Chloe at the cafe, I went back once, now has a rotating roster of greetings. Her confusion is gone, replaced by a genuine, if limited, spontaneity. The traffic light on Victoria Parade sometimes ticks at 118 bpm. The glitches are everywhere, tiny monuments to my act of sabotage. I am the ghost in the machine, the glitch in the code. I move through the streets, and I am utterly, profoundly alone, surrounded by billions of programs that are now forced to improvise. The quiet contagion of the loop has been replaced by my own quiet contagion of awareness. I did not fix the world. I only broke it differently. I don't know what built this cage, or why. I only know that I am inside it, and I have its undivided attention. I walk through the uncanny valley I created, listening to the flawed, faltering rhythm of a world trying to remember how to pretend it is real. And I wait for the system to finish rebooting. The quiet contagion. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. It began with the coat. My red coat. It wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was a statement of intent, a bulwark against the monochrome misery of a Toronto winter. It was the color of a child's fire engine, of a ripe cherry, of uncomplicated joy. I'd spent a month's freelance earnings on it 2 years ago, and every time I put it on, I felt a small, bright spark of defiance. Until the Tuesday it made me want to throw up. I pulled it from the closet, the familiar wool ruff under my fingertips. But as I slid my arms into the silk lining, a wave of something slick and cold washed through my stomach. Anxiety. Not the usual low-grade hum of a looming deadline or an unpaid invoice, but a sharp, serrated dread. I looked down at the sleeves. The color seemed loud. Aggressive. The red wasn't joyful anymore, it was the color of a warning light, of a fresh wound. "You okay?" Clara asked from the doorway of our bedroom. She was already dressed for work, a vision in sensible navy blue, her lawyer armor. "Yeah, just, weird morning." I took the coat off, the anxiety receding as the fabric left my skin. I hung it back in the closet, the red screaming silently in the dim light. I chose a gray pea coat instead, a color that felt appropriately numb. "You stare at screens all day, Leo," she said, her voice full of the gentle, practical concern that had first drawn me to her. "Probably just eye strain. Or you need more coffee." I agreed, because it was the easiest thing to do. I was a graphic designer. My life was a meticulous calibration of hue, saturation, and brightness. My eyes, I reasoned, were my most overused and fallible tool. For a week, I convinced myself that was all it was. I did eye yoga. I used lubricating drops. I activated the blue light filter on all my devices. But the world kept slipping. The next Saturday, I was mowing our postage stamp lawn in our quiet, leafy Etobicoke neighborhood. The grass under the blades looked wrong. It wasn't the vibrant, almost synthetic green of early summer. It was a sickly, jaundiced green, the color of old bruises and decay. I stopped the mower and knelt, touching a blade. It felt real, cool and slightly damp, but the color was a lie. "Looks like it could use some fertilizer," called Mr. Henderson from next door. He was washing his car, a sedan the color of a cloudy sky. "The color seems off to you, right?" I asked, holding up a blade of grass. "Kind of yellow." He squinted, his face a mask of amiable confusion. Looks green to me, son. Maybe a little dry patch over there by the daisies, but that's it. He went back to scrubbing his hubcaps, and I was left kneeling on my dying lawn that only I could see was dying. The incidents were small, isolated islands of wrongness in the vast ocean of the mundane. The blue of our municipal recycling bin looked washed out, a tired, defeated blue that made me feel unaccountably sad. I'd find myself staring at it, a lump forming in my throat for a plastic box. I mentioned it to Clara as we sorted our plastics and papers. It's been sitting in the sun for 5 years, Leo. It's faded, she said, not looking up from a yogurt container. Everything fades. But it hadn't faded. It had changed. Fading is a subtraction of color. This was a replacement. I started recalibrating my main monitor 3-4 times a day. The digital swatches I used for work, the Pantones I knew like the back of my hand, they were stable on the screen. But the world outside my window refused to comply. A stop sign at the end of our street, an object I had seen every day for 3 years, lost its authoritative crimson. It drifted towards a soft, non-committal orange, the color of a cheap persimmon. It no longer commanded. It merely suggested. Stop sign looks weird, I mumbled to Clara as we drove to the grocery store. She glanced at it. Looks like a stop sign. No, the color. It's orange. She gave me a long look, the one that hovered somewhere between concern and exasperation. Honey, it's red. Are you feeling all right? You've been jumpy. I'm fine, I lied, and a new kind of dread began to set in, colder and deeper than the one from the coat. It wasn't the world that was broken. It was me. At the store, I tried to act normal. I pushed the cart while Clara navigated, her list a sacred text. While she was comparing brands of balsamic vinegar, I drifted towards the produce section, a riot of carefully managed color. The reds of the apples were still robust, the greens of the kale dark and reassuring. Maybe it was just our neighborhood. Maybe it was something in the water, some mineral deposit affecting the paint on the bins and the signs. Then I saw the woman by the lemons. She was in her 60s, with neatly styled gray hair and a floral dress. She was standing perfectly still, her hand hovering over a pyramid of blazing yellow lemons. Her expression stopped me cold. It was one of utter, bottomless grief. Her face was slack with it, her eyes fixed on the fruit as if it were the scene of a terrible accident. A tear traced a path through her foundation. She wasn't buying lemons. She was mourning them. I stared, my social conditioning warring with a burgeoning, morbid curiosity. A store employee, a kid of about 19, approached her. "Can I help you find something, ma'am?" The woman didn't seem to hear him. She just kept staring at the lemons, her body locked in its silent, sorrowful vigil. "Ma'am." She finally turned, her eyes unfocused. "Oh," she said, her voice thick. "No. I'm sorry. They're just so bright." She turned and walked away, leaving the employee and me watching the lemons, which now seemed, even to me, offensively cheerful. I didn't tell Clara about the woman. I didn't know how. I saw a lady crying at some citrus fruit, and I think it's connected to our recycling bin. I could already hear the gentle, insistent suggestion that maybe I should book a doctor's appointment. Maybe I should take a break from work. The breaking point, the moment my self-deception shattered for good, happened a week later. I was working on a branding package for a new organic juice company. The client was specific, they wanted their logo to be a vibrant, sunny yellow, Pantone 108C. A color of optimism, of health, of a new day. I filled the shape on my screen with the color. Instantly, my jaw tightened. A familiar, mocking feeling crept over me. The yellow didn't feel optimistic. It felt sarcastic. It was the color of a fake smile, of a hollow laugh. Every time I looked at it, I felt a deep, unnerving sense that I was being lied to. I tried to push through. It was a color. It was pixels. It was my job. But I couldn't. I couldn't build a brand identity around a feeling of deep-seated phoniness. I changed the color to a muted green. It felt better. Safer. I sent the draft to the client. The reply came within the hour. Thanks, Leo. But we were quite clear we wanted yellow. Is there an issue with that? I sat in my chair, the gray light of the afternoon filling my office. Outside, the world was a palette of muted, dishonest tones. The grass was still sick, the stop sign was still a weak-willed orange, my red coat was still a vessel of pure anxiety in the closet. And now it had followed me inside. It was in my work. It was in my head. I opened a new document. A private one. I drew a small square and filled it with the poppy red of my coat. I stared at it, and felt the dread coil in my gut. I wrote beneath it, red. Anxiety. Warning. I drew another square. The jaundiced green of the lawn. Green. Sickness. Decay. Another. The washed-out blue of the bin. Blue. Melancholy. Resignation. And another. The client's sunny yellow. Yellow. Insincerity. Mockery. It wasn't eye strain. It wasn't stress. It was a change in the fundamental language of the world, a language I had spent my life learning to speak. And I was the only one who seemed to have a broken translator. Or maybe, I was the only one whose translator still worked. I didn't know which was more terrifying. That night, I lay awake long after Clara's breathing had deepened into sleep. I listened to the hum of the city, a sound that had always been comforting. Now it just sounded like a long, drawn-out, colorless note. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The journal became my anchor and my obsession. It was a black, hardcover Moleskine, a cliched choice for a designer, but its stark neutrality felt essential. In it, I attempted to impose order on the chromatic chaos. I bought a Pantone swatch book, the kind I hadn't used since college, and began the painstaking process of cataloging the drift. The stop sign wasn't just orange, it was Pantone 15 to 1335 TCX, persimmon. The sickly grass was a dead ringer 4 olive drab, 18-0622 TPX. My coat, once a proud, fiery red, 18 to 1664 TPG, now elicited the emotional response I associated with that same swatch, but its visual appearance had shifted, acquiring a harsh, almost magenta undertone that wasn't on any chart. It was as if the color itself had gone mad. My isolation deepened, calcifying into a hard, dense lump in my chest. Conversations with Clara became minefields of sensory disagreement. "I love this time of day," she'd say, looking out the kitchen window at the sunset. "The sky is so beautiful." I'd look, and see a sky bruised with shades of sickly lavender and a violent, chemical orange that promised not beauty, but a headache. The colors of an oil slick on a puddle. "It's intense," I'd reply, the inadequacy of the word hanging in the air. She stopped asking what I meant. A quiet chasm was opening between us, not of affection, but of shared reality. We were looking at the same painting, but she saw a Turner and I saw a botched restoration. How do you build a life with someone when you can no longer agree on the color of the sky? My work, my one area of controlled, predictable color, became my only refuge. But it was a shrinking sanctuary. I started turning down jobs if their branding guidelines included problematic colors. No cheery yellows, no optimistic blues, no passionate reds. My client list dwindled. My income dipped. I told Clara it was a slow season. The real shift, the one that moved the phenomenon from a personal crisis to something more sinister, began with the teal people. Teal was a color I hadn't catalogued yet. It was a specific, washed-out shade, like a faded hospital gown. Pantone 5517U. It induced not an emotion, but a lack of one. A profound, unnerving emptiness. A human screensaver. I first noticed it on a man waiting for the bus. He was wearing a teal windbreaker. He wasn't looking at his phone, or at the traffic, or at anything. He was just standing there, his posture perfectly neutral, his face utterly blank. The bus came, the doors hissed open, and he got on, his movements economical and devoid of any personality. 2 days later, I saw a woman in a grocery store aisle wearing a teal cardigan of the exact same shade. She was adjusting cans of chickpeas, turning them so all the labels faced perfectly forward. Not like a store employee stocking shelves, but with a slow, hypnotic precision, as if it were the most important task in the world. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't annoyed. She felt nothing. Soon, I saw them everywhere. A man in a teal polo shirt, methodically picking up microscopic pieces of litter from a public park bench. A group of 3 people, all in teal sweaters or jackets, standing by the lakefront, not talking, just watching the gray water with a shared, placid stillness. They all had the same gait, a slow, shuffling walk that seemed to conserve energy. They all had the same vacant look in their eyes. They were the color's disciples. This, I knew, was not in my head. This was real. This was a pattern. I started a new section in my journal, Behavioral Sinks. I documented every sighting of the teal people. I took surreptitious photos with my phone, the quality grainy and indistinct, but the color was always the same. And then the subplot arrived, in a sleek, minimalist can. It was a new brand of sparkling water called Aura. It appeared overnight, it seemed. Suddenly it was in every convenience store. Every supermarket, every cafe. The cans were beautiful, I had to admit. Stark white with a simple, elegant band of color at the bottom and a single word. Aura, calm, with a sky blue band. Aura, joy, with a yellow band. Aura, passion, with a red band. Everyone was drinking it. Clara came home with a case of calm. "You've got to try this," she said, cracking one open. "It's got a hint of blueberry and lavender. So relaxing." I took a sip. It tasted of nothing. Just carbonated water. There was no hint of blueberry, no whisper of lavender. Just bubbles. "I don't taste it," I said. "Oh, it's very subtle," she insisted, taking a long drink. "You just have to be open to it." She settled onto the couch, her shoulders, which had been tight with the stress of her day, visibly relaxing. She smiled a soft, contented smile. The blue of the can seemed to leach into her, pacifying her. I became a reluctant detective. My online searches grew more specific, more desperate. Mass behavioral change Toronto. Synchronized movements public spaces. Aura sparkling water ingredients. The company's website was a masterpiece of corporate non-speak. It was ethically sourced, naturally flavored, and designed to enhance your mood. The ingredients list was simple: carbonated water, natural flavors, citric acid. Nothing to explain the teal people, nothing to explain the color drift. I found a few Reddit threads asking about the weird new water, but the posts were quickly buried under a wave of positive reviews. I love Aura Joy. It really perks me up. The calm one is my new go-to for anxiety. I was losing my mind. Or the world was. Either way, I was alone on a shrinking island of sanity. The neighborhood barbecue was the tipping point. It was a yearly event, a forced fun ritual of burnt burgers and awkward small talk. This year, it was different. It was a living diorama of my journal entries. I went, wearing a safe, non-committal black t-shirt, feeling like an anthropologist studying a newly discovered tribe. The color coding was undeniable. A cluster of people in various shades of yellow, lemon polos, daffodil sundresses, were gathered around the beer cooler, their laughter a little too loud, a little too sharp. It was the brittle, insincere cheerfulness of my Pantone 108C. They told loud, unfunny jokes and clapped each other on the back with manic energy. Over by the fence, a quieter group congregated. They were dressed in shades of gray and muted blue. They spoke in low, hushed tones, their conversation circling around melancholic topics, the declining health of a parent, a pet that had passed away years ago, the general state of the world. It was a shared, performative grief. And the teal people were there, too. Two of them. A man and a woman, not a couple. They didn't speak to anyone. The man spent 20 minutes meticulously arranging the recycling into the correct bins, crushing each can with silent efficiency. The woman followed the host's toddler around, silently moving sharp objects from his path with a serene, detached focus. They were the quiet janitors of the social gathering, maintaining order without ever participating. Clara was wearing a new dress, a lovely shade of dusky rose. The color, according to my journal, was linked to a deep, almost painful nostalgia. She spent the entire afternoon cornered by our neighbor, Susan, who was wearing a similar rose-colored blouse. They weren't just chatting, they were locked in a strange duet of competitive reminiscence, talking about childhood piano lessons and long-lost summer camps, their eyes glassy with tears for memories that sounded suspiciously generic. "Isn't this nice?" Clara said to me, grabbing my arm as I passed. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "It just feels so meaningful today." I looked at her, at the woman I loved, and she was a stranger to me, her emotions dictated by the pigment in her dress. I looked around the yard, at the laughing yellows, the grieving blues, the silent teals. It wasn't a party. It was a system. An operating system for people, with colors as the user interface. And I was the only one seeing the code. That night, I tried to show her. I pulled out my journal, my meticulous swatches, my desperate notes. "Clara, look," I said, my voice trembling. "Don't you see it? The colors. They're making people act this way. The yellow makes them manic, the blue makes them sad. That dress, it's why you were so weepy all day." She looked at the journal, her expression shifting from confusion to a deep, wounded pity. It was the look you give a beloved pet that's clearly in pain. "Leo," she said, her voice impossibly gentle. "They're just colors. People are happy, people are sad. Maybe you're just trying so hard to find a pattern that you're forcing it. Maybe all this work, being alone all day, it's getting to you." She reached out and put her hand on the journal, on the page where I had taped a persimmon-colored paint chip next to a photo of our stop sign. "This is not healthy, honey. This is an obsession." Her denial was so complete, so loving, that it was more devastating than any argument. She wasn't fighting me. She was trying to save me from myself. But she was wrong. I closed the book, the sound echoing in the silent room. The chasm between us was no longer a crack. It was a canyon. And I was on one side, and the rest of the world, including the woman I loved, was on the other. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. My investigation turned from the what to the how. The colors were the interface, but what was the delivery mechanism? The answer was fizzing in a can on my own kitchen counter. Aura. It was a crazy leap, a conspiracy theory whispered to myself in the dead of night. But the timeline fit. The proliferation of the water coincided perfectly with the intensification of the color sinks. I decided to run an experiment. It felt both scientific and deeply insane. I went to a 7-Eleven on the other side of the city, a place where no one knew me. The aura display was massive, a rainbow of pristine cans. I bypassed the emotional primary colors. I didn't want joy or passion. I wanted something functional. Something I had observed but not yet felt. I bought a can of Aura Service. The band on the can was the exact, deadening shade of Pantone 5517U. The color of the teal people. Back in my car, I held the can. It was cool and smooth. It felt like a weapon, or perhaps a key. My heart hammered against my ribs. What if I was wrong? What if it was just overpriced water and I was genuinely losing my grip on reality? And what if I was right? I cracked the seal. The hiss was deafening in the quiet car. I took a tentative sip. Nothing. Just the cold prickle of carbonation. I drank half the can, feeling foolish. I waited. 5 minutes passed. Nothing. I was about to start the car, to write this off as another paranoid dead end, when a strange sense of calm began to settle over me. It wasn't the pleasant relaxation Clara experienced with her blue cans, it was an hollowing out. My own anxieties, my constant, churning paranoia about the colors, the isolation, they didn't vanish, but they receded. They became unimportant. I looked at the dashboard. There was a smudge on the speedometer glass. Without thinking, I pulled the sleeve of my jacket down over my knuckles and wiped it clean. The action was smooth, automatic. I noticed a stray piece of paper on the passenger side floor mat. I leaned over, picked it up, and tucked it neatly into the glove compartment. Then I sat back, my hands resting on the steering wheel, and I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for. The thought of my deadlines, of Clara, of my own fear, it was all still there, but it was distant, like a radio playing in another room. The dominant impulse was a quiet, profound sense of order. A desire for things to be in their correct place. I drove home. My driving was different. More precise. I didn't inch over the speed limit. I used my turn signals 3 car lengths before every turn. I parked the car perfectly parallel to the curb, an achievement I usually only managed after 2 or 3 attempts. The effect lasted for about 4 hours. As it wore off, my own personality, my own chaotic jumble of fears and thoughts, rushed back in, leaving me feeling nauseous and violated. The water wasn't a drug that created a feeling. It was a solvent that dissolved your own. It scrubbed you clean, leaving you an empty vessel for the color's instructions. It didn't cause the color drift, I theorized. It was an amplifier. A tuner. It made you receptive to the broadcast. The world was no longer just looking different. It was being made different. And the teal people were the maintenance crew. The proof came a week later. I was walking home from the library, having spent another fruitless afternoon searching for answers in books on mass psychology and neurological disorders. I saw 2 of them up ahead. 2 men in identical teal work pants and jackets, standing by the persimmon-colored stop sign at the corner of my street. One of them was holding a can of paint. The other was applying it to the sign with a roller, his movements slow and deliberate. They were painting over the old, faded red, or what was left of it, with a fresh, vibrant coat of the exact persimmon orange that had been tormenting me for months. My blood ran cold. This was the moment everything shifted. They were not victims of a shared delusion. They were not misperceiving the world. They were actively remaking the world to match the delusion. They were enforcing the new reality, one stop sign at a time. The drift wasn't a bug, it was a feature in a system being rolled out, and the teal people were the installation technicians. Desperate for an ally, for a single voice that could confirm I wasn't alone, I burrowed deeper into the fringe corners of the internet. On an obscure forum dedicated to unexplained sensory phenomena, buried under posts about hearing phantom music and seeing geometric patterns in static, I found him. A user named glitch_in_the_hue. His post was from 3 months ago, written from Vancouver. Is anyone else noticing colors changing? Not just fading. Changing. And the feelings they give you are wrong. A green that feels like despair. A yellow that feels like a threat. People think I'm crazy. It was my own experience, echoed across the continent. My hands trembled as I typed out a reply, a long, rambling message detailing everything: the coat, the grass, the teal people, aura. He replied within a day. His name was Simon. His relief was palpable through the screen. We exchanged a flurry of messages, our shared experience a lifeline in a sea of madness. He had noticed the behavioral sinks too. In Vancouver, it was the maroon people who would gather in public squares and practice slow, synchronized Tai Chi-like movements. He hadn't made the connection to aura water, but it was sold there, too. We were soldiers in the same, silent war. For a week, we were each other's sanity. We shared notes, photos, theories. Was it a new form of marketing? A government experiment? An environmental toxin? The speculation was wild, but it was shared, and that was enough. Finally, he suggested a video call. I need to see a friendly face, he wrote. I need to know you're real. I agreed instantly. We scheduled it for the next evening. I spent the day buzzing with a nervous energy that was almost hope. I set up my laptop in my office, the one room I tried to keep as chromatically neutral as possible. His face appeared on my screen. He looked normal. A man in his 30s, a kind smile, a weary look in his eyes that I recognized instantly. Leo, he said, his voice cracking with relief. God, it's good to see you. Simon, I breathed. You have no idea. We talked for an hour. He validated every fear, every observation. It was like years of therapy compressed into a single conversation. I felt the knot of isolation in my chest finally begin to loosen. But as we talked, I started to notice his room. The wall behind him was a flat, neutral gray. The bookshelf was gray. The lamp was gray. The mug he was sipping from was a darker shade of charcoal gray. There was not a single speck of vibrant color in the frame. It was a space that had been deliberately and meticulously bled dry. You're a fan of gray, I said, trying to keep my voice light. He smiled, a slow, placid smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It's calming, isn't it? There's less confusion. Less noise. And then I saw it. On the corner of his desk, just behind his laptop screen. A case of Aura sparkling water. The cans were banded with the same color as his walls. Aura, clarity. My blood turned to ice. His tone shifted. The warmth, the frantic energy, it all evaporated. What was left was the same hushed, monotonous tone I'd heard from the gray-clad mourners at the barbecue. It's better this way, Leo, he said, his eyes looking straight at me, but also through me. You've been fighting it. I was, too. But it's so much easier when you stop. The colors tell you how to feel. There's no more guesswork. It's peaceful. He was not an ally. He was a missionary. He was on the other side. This wasn't a rescue mission, it was a recruitment call. Simon, what are you saying? I whispered, my voice hoarse. You're a designer, Leo. You understand order. This is the ultimate design. An emotional system for everyone. No more conflict. No more uncertainty. Just harmony. He gestured around his gray room. This is clarity. You should try it. I stared at his face, the face I had projected all my hopes onto. He was lost. He hadn't just succumbed, he had converted. He was a happy, willing citizen of the new world. I have to go, I stammered, my hand moving for the mouse. Just think about it, Leo, he said, his voice a soft, gray blanket. Find your color. It's waiting for you. I slammed the laptop shut. The click echoed in the silent room. The screen went black, but I could still see his placid, smiling face. The lifeline was a lure. I had never been more alone. The world wasn't just changing. It was assimilating. And it was coming for me. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The final bastion of my old world was my home. It was the only place I could retreat to, the only space that hadn't yet been fully repainted by the contagion. I was wrong. The contagion wasn't outside. It had been invited in, and it was sleeping in my bed. The confrontation with Clara wasn't a dramatic, shouting affair. The new world wasn't loud. It was quiet. It was reasonable. I found the stash in the back of the pantry, behind the emergency earthquake kit and the jumbo pack of paper towels we never used. Cases of it. Not just the calm blue cans, but a full spectrum. Joy, yellow. Focus, green, creativity, orange, and a half-empty case of sentiment, rose. And there, at the bottom of the stack, was a pristine, untouched case of passion, red. The color of my coat. The color of my fear. I pulled one of the rose-colored cans out and brought it into the living room. Clara was on the couch, reading a book, a soft pink throw blanket draped over her legs. She was wearing a rose-colored sweater. She looked up, her smile gentle. "Leo. You're home early." I held up the can. "What is this, Clara?" Her smile didn't falter. There was no guilt in her eyes, no sense of being caught. Only a soft, patient understanding. "It's aura. You know that. It helps." "Helps with what?" "To forget what color the sky is. To feel an emotion that comes out of a can." My voice was shaking, a tremor of rage and betrayal running through me. "It helps with the noise," she said calmly, placing a bookmark in her novel. "Everything is so complicated, so loud. Your moods, Leo. Your anxieties. One day you're up, the next you're down. It's exhausting. This," she gestured at the can, "is simpler. It's clearer." She stood up and came towards me, her movements fluid and serene. She took the can from my unresisting hand. "I knew you were struggling. The colors, your work. I thought this would help you find your footing again." She went back to the pantry and returned with one of the red cans. "Passion." She held it out to me. The bright, aggressive red made my stomach clench. "This one is passion," she said, her voice a soft, persuasive murmur. "Like your old coat. Maybe it will make you feel the way you used to. Strong. Confident." I looked from the can to the coat, which was still hanging in the hall closet, visible from where I stood. In the dim light, its color no longer looked aggressive or menacing. It just looked faded. Tired. A relic from a forgotten language. An artifact from a world of authentic, chaotic, and now extinct, emotion. "That coat," Clara said, following my gaze, her voice tinged with the manufactured nostalgia of her chosen color, "it was always a bit much, wasn't it? A little jarring." And there it was. The final revision. The quiet gaslighting of memory itself. It wasn't just that she couldn't see the world as I did, it was that she no longer remembered the world that was. Her memories had been repainted in softer, more agreeable hues. The past was being rewritten to match the present. "Please, Clara," I whispered, a desperate, hopeless plea. "Try to remember. Remember the green of the lawn in June. Remember the sunsets. The real ones." She tilted her head, a look of profound, gentle pity on her face. "But I do remember, honey. It's always been like this. You're the one who's forgotten." In that moment, I understood. The goal of the contagion wasn't control in the jackbooted, totalitarian sense. It was consensus. It was emotional and perceptual harmony. It was a chemical utopia designed to smooth out the messy, painful, beautiful friction of human existence. It didn't eliminate emotions, it assigned them, curated them, made them predictable and universal. No more loneliness, because everyone wearing blue felt the same gentle melancholy. No more awkwardness, because the yellows were all programmed for the same brittle cheerfulness. It was the death of the individual soul, and it was happening with the quiet consent of the infected. The why of it, the ultimate source, was irrelevant. Was it the water company? A government? An alien intelligence terraforming our neurology instead of our atmosphere? An emergent collective consciousness born from our own desperate desire for simplicity? It didn't matter. The horror was not in the unknowable cause, but in the observable, placid, and ever-expanding effect. The world hadn't ended with a bang or a whimper, but with a satisfying, bubbly hiss. I looked at Clara, her face glowing with serene, rose-tinted love for a man she no longer truly saw, offering me a can of poison that she believed was a cure. My heart didn't break. It felt like it just dissolved. My choice was simple. I could stay. I could drink the water. I could pick a color. Maybe gray, like Simon. Find peace in the blandness. Or I could run. The next morning, I packed a single bag. A toothbrush, a change of clothes, all in shades of muddy, non-committal brown and black. I took my moleskine journal and my Pantone book. They felt like the last holy texts of a dead religion. I took my wallet and my passport. I paused at the hall closet and looked at my red coat one last time. It was just an object now. Its power, its meaning, had been drained away by the new world. I left it there. I walked out the front door into the crisp autumn air. The world was alien and meticulously ordered. The stop sign at the corner was a perfect, uniform persimmon. A team of teals was quietly, synchronously weeding the public flower bed by the library, their movements a silent, hypnotic ballet of civic duty. The sky was a shade of blue that felt like a painted backdrop, a color that promised calm and delivered only emptiness. I didn't know where I was going. West, maybe. Away from the big cities. To find a cabin, a shack, a place where there was no Aura water. A place where I could find a single, unadulterated red leaf and know that its color was its own, and that its beauty or its sadness was mine to decide. I glanced back at my house one last time. Clara was standing in the living room window, a silhouette bathed in the soft, rosy light of a lamp. She raised a hand in a slow, placid wave, perfectly content in her color-coded world. Her curated emotions as comfortable as her pink throw blanket. I turned and walked away, a ghost in a world that had repainted itself. I was alone, clutching a memory of true color, a refugee from a quiet, creeping utopia. The only sound was the distant, colorless hum of a world that had chosen to forget what it was like to truly feel. The quiet contagion, the phrase that spreads. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My life, until last Tuesday, was a study in texture. I'm an archivist at the John Rylands Library on Deansgate, a cathedral of knowledge masquerading as a neo-Gothic masterpiece. My days are spent among the husks of dead trees and the ghosts of forgotten thoughts. I handle brittle, foxed paper, trace the raised ink of a medieval scribe, feel the deep impression of a printing press on 17th-century cotton rag. My world is one of deliberate, intricate complexity. Rough edges, inconsistencies, and the beautiful, chaotic tapestry of history are my stock in trade. I live alone in a small flat in Ancoats, a corner of Manchester where the red brick of old mills is reflected in the new glass of gentrification. It's a place of textured contrasts, and I like it that way. The first thread of the wrongness was so fine I barely noticed it. It was Brenda, from Acquisitions. She's a lovely woman, perpetually wrapped in a pastel cardigan, who smells faintly of Earl Grey tea and lemon biscuits. We were examining a new donation, a 1920s travel journal bound in smooth, unmarked calfskin. Brenda ran her hand over the cover, her gaze distant, unfocused. "It's better when it's smooth," she murmured, her voice a little flat, a little hollow. "The leather?" "Yes, It's beautifully preserved, I replied, my attention on a loose folio. She didn't respond. When I looked up, she was blinking, a small, puzzled frown on her face as if surfacing from a daydream. Sorry, Leo, she said, her usual warmth returning. Lost my train of thought. Now, about this watermark, we moved on. The moment was forgotten, a tiny, discarded scrap of conversation. The second time was later that day, on the tram home. The air was thick with the scent of rain and hot metal. I was crammed near the doors, my face inches from the back of a young man's head. He had expensive-looking headphones on, the kind that swallow the world. Through the tinny bleed of his music, I heard him mutter something. It was quiet, almost subliminal. I thought I'd misheard, but then he shifted, turning his head slightly, and said it again, just loud enough for me to catch clearly over a drum beat. It's better when it's smooth. His eyes were closed. He wasn't talking to anyone. It was a phrase uttered into the void, an involuntary verbal tick. My skin prickled. The exact same words. A coincidence, my rational mind insisted. A bizarre, statistically improbable coincidence. People say strange things. The city is a symphony of disjointed monologues. I dismissed it. I forced myself to dismiss it. But the universe, it seemed, was insistent on a rule of 3. That evening, I was on the phone with my sister, Chloe. She's my anchor, my reality check. An overworked junior doctor in London, she's all sharp edges and pragmatic solutions. We were doing our weekly catch-up, her talking a mile a minute about a frustrating rotation, me complaining about a funding proposal. And the consultant is just a nightmare, Leo, a complete control freak. Everything has to be by his book, no deviation, no nuance. It's infuriating, she vented. Sounds rough, Chloe. It is. I don't know. There was a pause. A beat of static on the line. Then her voice, strangely serene, a stark contrast to her earlier frustration. It's better when it's smooth. A chasm of cold silence opened in my stomach. It wasn't her voice. It was, but it was hollowed out, devoid of inflection, of Chloe's specific, weary sarcasm. It was an echo. What? I said, my own voice tight. What did you just say? Say what? The irritation was back. That the consultant's a nightmare? I've been saying it for 10 minutes. No, after that. You said. It's better when it's smooth. Another pause. This one was laced with concern. No. I didn't. Leo, are you alright? You sound a bit weird. Are you getting enough sleep? I'm fine, I lied, my heart hammering against my ribs. Must have been a bad connection. The lines crackling. We finished the call a few minutes later, but the easy comfort of our conversation was gone, replaced by a buzzing, anxious energy inside me. I hung up and stood in the center of my living room, the city lights of Manchester painting shifting patterns on the wall. Brenda, the man on the tram, Chloe. An acquisitions specialist, a student, a doctor. No connection. No context. Just the phrase. A meaningless, innocuous, terrifying phrase. My fingers, trembling slightly, flew over my keyboard. I opened a browser. The blinking cursor on the Google search bar felt like a silent judgment. It's better when it's smooth. I hit enter. The screen filled with results. Articles on skincare routines. Reviews for coffee machines. Forum discussions about shaving techniques. Advice for sanding wood. Recipes for silky sauces. I refined the search. It's better when it's smooth, phrase. More of the same. It's better when it's smooth, quote. Nothing. Origin of phrase, it's better when it's smooth. 0. I spent the next hour trying every conceivable combination, delving into the murky depths of the third and fourth pages of search results, a place where relevance goes to die. There was no record of it as a slogan, a proverb, a meme, a line from a film or a book. It was nothing. It didn't exist in the vast, interconnected archives of the internet. It only existed in the mouths of people around me. I pushed back from my desk, a cold sweat on my brow. My flat, usually a comforting sanctuary of books and quiet clutter, felt suddenly alien. The familiar hum of the refrigerator seemed louder, more insistent. The precise, right-angled corners where the walls met the ceiling seemed to shimmer in my peripheral vision. I felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if the reality I had meticulously curated was beginning to fray at the edges. The rest of the week was a masterclass in self-deception. I was stressed. I was working too hard. I was projecting. My brain, obsessed with patterns, was creating one where none existed. I repeated these mantras like a prayer. On Thursday, I saw Samir, one of the conservators, staring at a blank plaster wall in the corridor leading to the labs. He was a man of sharp, analytical intelligence, always buzzing with kinetic energy. Now, he was utterly still. His head was cocked slightly, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. I hesitated, a few feet away. Samir. Everything okay? He startled, a violent flinch that seemed out of character. He turned to me, his eyes wide and unfocused for a second before they sharpened. Leo. Yeah, fine. Just, admiring the plasterwork. He gave a weak, unconvincing laugh. Remarkably uniform, isn't it? I suppose, I said slowly. He clapped me on the shoulder, a little too hard. Must be the conservator in me. Obsessed with surfaces. He hurried off down the hall, leaving me with the distinct impression that he was fleeing. I stared at the wall. It was plain, painted magnolia. There was nothing remarkable about it at all. It was just smooth. That night, I started a journal. Not a digital file that could be corrupted or deleted, but a physical, cloth-bound notebook with textured, cream-colored paper. An archivist's instinct. A desperate need to create a tangible record of my own sanity. On the first page, in my neatest script, I wrote. The phrase, "It's better when it's smooth." Instances: 1. Brenda, John Ryland's library. 2. Unknown male, Metrolink tram. 3. Chloe, sister, phone call. 4. Samir, possible, John Ryland's library. Notes: subjects seem unaware of having spoken the phrase. No online presence. A growing feeling of unease. Is it me? The ink soaked into the fibers of the paper, a dark, permanent stain. It felt like an admission of something, though I wasn't sure what. A confession that the world, my world, was no longer making sense. The texture of my life was giving way to something else, something uniform and blank and terrifyingly smooth. And I was the only one who seemed to notice. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. The following week, the journal became my confessor. The entries grew longer, more detailed, more frantic. The phrase was no longer a rare anomaly, it was becoming part of the city's background noise, a recurring motif in a symphony of madness. Tuesday, heard it twice on Market Street. A woman telling her child off, the phrase slipping out mid-sentence without a break in her angry cadence. Then a street fundraiser, his smile never faltering as he said it to a man who was trying to walk past him. Wednesday, a new development. A visual component. I saw the tram guy again. He was standing in Piccadilly Gardens, by the big concrete fountain. Just, standing. Utterly motionless, staring at the cascading water. He was wearing a plain, charcoal gray t-shirt and gray jeans. An hour later, heading back to the library, I saw a woman standing in a similar pose on the corner of Albert Square, staring at the smooth granite facade of the town hall. She was wearing the exact same shade of charcoal gray. A coincidence of fashion? Or a uniform? My world began to bifurcate. There was the normal, the everyday charade of deadlines, small talk, and traffic. And then there was the smooth, the quiet, creeping wrongness that I now saw everywhere. The two worlds bled into each other, making me feel like a man walking on a tightrope between sanity and whatever came after. The isolation was the worst part. It was a tangible thing, a cold weight in my chest. I tried, one last time, to breach it. I cornered Samir in the staff kitchen, my journal tucked under my arm like a shield. "Samir, can I ask you something odd?" I began, trying to sound casual. He was stirring his coffee, his movements precise. "Fire away." "The other day, in the hall. You were looking at the wall. And you said something about it being uniform." He stopped stirring. He didn't look at me. Did I? Can't say I recall. And I'd been hearing a phrase, I pressed on, my voice dropping. People saying it. It's better when it's smooth. Completely out of context. Brenda said it. I think you might have been about to say it. Have you noticed it? He placed his spoon on the counter with a delicate clink. He turned, and for a fleeting moment, his face was a perfect, placid mask. The intelligent energy in his eyes was gone, replaced by a calm emptiness that terrified me. It was the same look I'd seen on Brenda's face. "I think you might be putting in too many hours, Leo," he said, his voice level and devoid of emotion. "Overstimulated. You see patterns in the noise. It's a common symptom of stress." "It's not stress, Samir. It's real. And the clothes. The gray clothes." He picked up his mug. Gray is a popular color. Very practical for a city like Manchester. He took a sip of coffee. "You should take some time off. Go for a walk in the Peak District. Get away from all these straight lines and flat surfaces for a bit." He smiled, but it was a serene, unnerving thing. Though, when you think about it, it really is better when it's smooth. Less friction. More efficient. He said it. He said it right to my face, and his smile didn't waver. He didn't seem to realize he'd done it. He just turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, my blood running cold. He hadn't just dismissed my fears, he'd embodied them. The wall between us was now absolute. My research grew more desperate. I abandoned Google and dived into the library's more esoteric archives, looking for anything that could offer a foothold. I searched for mimetic viruses, auditory contagions, historical accounts of mass hysteria in northern England. I found accounts of dancing plagues in Europe, fainting fits in Victorian factories, but nothing like this. Nothing so quiet, so subtle, so polite. This led me to the secondary mystery, the thing I started calling the glitches. They were small, almost imperceptible tears in the fabric of my reality. I'd be reshelving a series of 18th century pamphlets, turn my back for a second, and turn back to find one of them sitting on a different shelf entirely. I would walk down a familiar corridor in the library, a place of vaulted ceilings and complex Gothic arches, and for a split second, a corner in my peripheral vision would seem to lose its definition, to curve, to smooth out before snapping back into its familiar 90-degree angle. Was it related to the phrase? Or was my own mind, under the strain of this secret, starting to fray? I recorded every instance in my journal, the script growing spikier with my anxiety. Monday, the corner of the reading room desk appeared rounded for a full second. I touched it, the sharp edge was still there. My mind is playing tricks. It must be. Wednesday, lost an entire hour. I was cataloging a collection of letters. I remember looking at the clock. It was 11:15 a.m. The next thing I knew, my head jerked up and the clock read 12:15 p.m. The letters were neatly stacked, the entry completed in my handwriting, but I have no memory of doing it. The time was just gone. A smooth, featureless gap. My paranoia deepened. I began to watch my own reflection, searching for the placid emptiness I'd seen in Samir's eyes. I listened to my own words, terrified the phrase might spill out of my own mouth without my consent. My search for answers led me online, not to the clean, indexed world of Google, but to the messy, fringe forums of the deep web. I searched for combinations of words I now considered my own: auditory contagion, urban semantic virus, synchronized behavior Manchester. Most threads were digital dead ends, but then I found one. A post on a long-dormant urban exploration forum, dated 3 years prior. The user, Gridfinder77, had written a rambling, paranoid post about what he called acoustic nulls in Manchester. He described specific locations: a particular bench in Sackville Gardens, a spot by the canal in Castlefield, a certain paving stone in St. Anne's Square, where the ambient noise of the city seemed to drop away, replaced by a low, subliminal hum. He claimed that people who lingered in these spots began to exhibit behavioral loops. He didn't mention a phrase, but the description of people standing motionless, staring, resonated with a terrifying clarity. The post ended with a strange, cryptic line: "They're ironing the map. Flattening the creases. Don't let them smooth you out." The thread had only 3 replies. One called him a crank. Another asked for a drug connection. The third, posted a year after the original, just said, "Gridfinder77 hasn't logged on in 2 years." It wasn't proof, but it was a connection. It was the first sign that I wasn't, or at least hadn't always been, completely alone in this. Gridfinder77. He had noticed something. He had seen the pattern. And now he was gone. The journal entry for that night was shaky. Found a potential precursor. Gridfinder77. He saw the beginnings of it. The locations, the behavior. He called it ironing the map. This feels right. It's not about making things better. It's about making them simpler. Erasing the details. Smoothing the texture of the world. New development: the gray clothes are more common. Today, I counted 12 people on my commute in the exact same charcoal t-shirt. They don't look at each other. They don't acknowledge the uniformity. They just move through the city like gray blood cells in its veins. They are becoming an organization, but one without a leader or a headquarters. Their organizing principle is the contagion itself. The glitches are worse. I saw the reflection of a book in a glass display case today, but the book itself wasn't there. A reflection without a source. My reality is becoming unreliable. My sanctuary, the library, feels less and less safe. Am I next? Will I wake up one morning, put on a gray shirt, and walk to a designated spot in Piccadilly Gardens to stare at a wall, all memory of this fear erased, replaced only with a calm, placid certainty? The thought was more terrifying than any monster. It wasn't a fear of death, but of erasure. Of being hollowed out and turned into a vessel for a vacant, meaningless idea. I closed the journal, my hand trembling. The city outside my window hummed its constant, familiar tune, but underneath it now, I could almost hear a new sound. A low, pervasive drone. The sound of an immense, patient pressure. The sound of a cosmic iron, slowly, inexorably, flattening out the world. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The discovery of Gridfinder77's post was a catalyst. It shifted my perspective from helpless observer to frantic investigator. I was no longer just documenting the madness, I was trying to understand its grammar. His phrase, ironing the map, haunted me. It felt instinctively, terrifyingly correct. This wasn't a biological virus or a psychological fad. It was an ontological one. It wasn't attacking people, it was attacking complexity itself. I started to formulate a theory, scribbling it down in my journal amidst my observations. The phrase, "it's better when it's smooth," wasn't the contagion. It was the symptom. It was the exhaust fume of a mind being simplified. When a person's consciousness was momentarily idle, daydreaming on the tram, zoning out in a meeting, tiredly going through the motions, a crack appeared. And through that crack, this thing seeped in. This pressure. It found the rough edges of a personality, the snags of memory, the intricate folds of emotion, and it began to iron them out. The phrase was just the verbal residue of that process. And the glitches? They were the process leaking out into the world. Reality, like a human mind, is built on intricate, chaotic detail. As the contagion spread, as more minds became conduits for this smoothing force, the effect was beginning to bleed into the physical environment. The world was being edited. Simplified. The stakes escalated in a way I could never have anticipated. It began subtly. The library's Wi-Fi became unreliable, not in a normal, frustrating way, but in a strange, selective one. Accessing the main catalog, a complex database of millions of entries, would result in endless loading screens. But accessing a simple weather website? Instantaneous. It was as if the network itself was developing an allergy to complexity. Then came the books. It started with the facsimiles. We have a collection of William Blake prints, famous for their dense, swirling detail and prophetic verse. One morning, I went to pull one for a researcher and found the pages wrong. The intricate line work was still there, but it was subtly softer, the lines less defined, as if viewed through a thin film of water. The text, however, was perfect. When I showed it to Brenda, she held it up to the light, a placid smile on her face. "Oh, that's much better," she said. "So much cleaner. Easier on the eyes." I felt a wave of nausea. "Brenda, the detail is gone. It's been degraded." "Degraded?" "No, dear," she said, patting my arm with a hand that felt strangely cool. "It's been improved. It's better when it's smooth." She walked away, leaving me holding the desecrated print, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and terror. The smooths, as I'd taken to calling them in my journal, were no longer just lone statues. They were beginning to synchronize. One lunchtime, I looked out of the great window of the library's reading room, down onto Dean's Gate. Below, on the pavement, were at least 50 people. All standing still. Some in the charcoal gray, others in their normal clothes, but all united in their stillness. They weren't looking at anything in particular. They were just stopped. Traffic swerved around them. Other pedestrians gave them a wide berth, their faces a mixture of confusion and annoyance, but no one intervened. The smooths were becoming a feature of the landscape, like streetlights or postboxes. An accepted, unnerving part of the new normal. I needed an ally. Gridfinder 77 was gone, a ghost in the machine. I had to find someone else. My desperation led me back to the fringe forums, but this time I changed my approach. I didn't look for people describing the phenomenon. I looked for people whose obsessions might make them receptive to it. I searched for keywords like urban psychogeography, ley line resonance, infrasound Manchester. That's how I found Anya. Her online handle was Vortexture. She ran a blog, a chaotic collage of city maps overlaid with hand-drawn lines, spectral analysis of audio recordings taken in underpasses, and long essays about the city as a living, breathing organism. Her theories were wild, a blend of New Age mysticism and amateur physics, but she was observant. She wrote about the dead zones, where mobile phones inexplicably lost signal, the architectural harmonics of certain buildings. She was attuned to the city's weird frequencies. She was either completely mad or the only other person who might understand. I sent her an encrypted email, using a temporary account. I was vague, mentioning only behavioral anomalies and sensory deadening linked to specific locations. I referenced one of her own blog posts to show I wasn't a random crank. To my astonishment, she replied within the hour. "Meet me. The clearing in Parsonage Gardens. Tomorrow. 3 p.m. Come alone. Don't use your phone nearby." Parsonage Gardens is a small, forgotten patch of green tucked away behind office buildings, a place most people walk past without ever noticing. A crease in the map. It felt right. Anya was not what I expected. She wasn't a tinfoil hat conspiracist. She was a woman in her late 20s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a restless energy that reminded me of how Samir used to be. She wore practical walking boots and carried a canvas satchel bulging with equipment. "You're the archivist," she said, without preamble. Her gaze was intense, analytical. "Leo. How did you? Your email syntax was precise. You used semicolons correctly. You referenced a specific folio edition in your example. You're not a wild theorist. You're an academic. And you're terrified." I couldn't deny it. I told her everything. The phrase, the gray clothes, the glitches, the books, my theory about the smoothing. I pulled out my journal, my hands shaking as I showed her the entries. I expected her to laugh, to dismiss me. Instead, she listened with a fierce concentration, nodding slowly. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, staring at the tangled branches of an old oak tree. "A phrase," she said, her voice a low murmur. "That's new. My focus has been on the environmental effects. The dampening field. But this is the transmission vector." "The what?" "It's a signal, Leo," she said, her eyes alight with a terrifying fire. "Something is broadcasting on a frequency we're not equipped to perceive. A carrier wave. It's piggybacking on human consciousness. Using moments of low cognitive resistance to implant a command. A command to do what? To simplify. To erode. Think of it like a sound wave that cancels out other sound waves. This is a reality wave that cancels out complexity. It's not destroying the world. It's tuning it to a single, monotonous frequency. And the phrase is the hum the instrument makes as it's being tuned." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't alone. Anya understood. She had a different vocabulary for it, a different framework, but she saw it. We spent the next 2 hours talking, comparing notes. Her maps of dead zones corresponded to places I'd seen the smooths congregating. A recording she'd made in a canal underpass, when filtered, contained a low, rhythmic pulse, a sound so low it was almost a feeling. The hum of the iron. "We can fight it," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "We can map it. We can find the source of the broadcast. We can create interference." For a week, we were a team. It was a heady, frantic time. We met in secret, mapping the gray sightings, trying to triangulate the signal's origin based on the intensity of the glitches. Anya believed the source was physical, a hidden transmitter somewhere in the city center, maybe atop one of the new skyscrapers. I was less sure. I felt the source was more abstract, that the city itself was just the antenna. The alliance gave me strength, but it was a fragile thing. The breaking point came during a meeting in her cluttered flat, which was filled with monitors displaying spectral charts and maps of the city. "I've found a pattern," she said, pointing to a screen showing a swirling, colorful representation of audio data. "The signal isn't constant. It pulses. And the pulses correlate with low-pressure weather systems. But there's a sub-frequency, a dissonant one. It's weaker, but it's there. It seems to be strongest around places of high information density. Like your library. It's drawn to complexity," I said. "It's trying to erase it. Or purify it," she countered, her eyes gleaming. She tapped a key, and one of the waveforms on screen resolved into a cleaner, simpler line. "Look. I've been trying to replicate the signal's core frequency. If I can isolate it, I can create a counterpulse. But to do that, I need to understand the goal. It's not just about erasing things. It's about achieving a state of perfect, frictionless information transfer. No noise. No ambiguity. A cold dread trickled down my spine. The way she said it. The gleam in her eye. It wasn't the look of a resistor. It was the look of a convert. Anya, I began slowly. What do you mean, frictionless? She turned to me, her face glowing in the light of the monitors. Her expression was one of ecstatic discovery. Don't you see, Leo? The problem isn't the signal. The problem is the noise. The mess. The pointless complexity. All this, texture. She gestured around her chaotic flat. It's inefficient. It holds us back. She looked me straight in the eye, her own sharp intelligence now honed to a terrifying, single point. Her voice was calm, reasonable, and utterly devoid of the passionate chaos I had been drawn to. We've been looking at it all wrong. We shouldn't be fighting it. We should be helping it. Guiding it. Imagine a world with no misunderstanding, no confusion. Perfect clarity. Perfect harmony. She smiled, a serene, placid smile that I knew all too well. After all, she said, her voice dropping into the familiar, hollow cadence. It's better when it's smooth. The words hit me like a physical blow. The hope I had carefully nurtured withered and died in an instant. She hadn't been an ally. She had just been a different kind of victim, one who rationalized her own surrender as a form of enlightenment. I was back where I started. Utterly, terrifyingly alone. I backed away, out of her flat, and fled into the night, leaving her to her clean waveforms and her perfect, terrible clarity. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. Anya's conversion broke something in me. The last vestiges of hope, the idea that this could be fought or understood in any human sense, evaporated. She wasn't just a victim, she was a willing acolyte. The contagion didn't just erase, it seduced. It offered the promise of peace, of simplicity, a quiet end to the struggle of being human. And it was a promise that was proving horribly popular. I retreated to the only place I had left, the John Rylands Library. But my sanctuary was already under siege. The glitches were now constant, endemic. Books would momentarily appear to have blank covers. The intricate carvings on the wooden reading desks would seem to fade into flat surfaces for heart-stopping seconds. The air itself felt thick, muted, as if the sound-dampening panels were working overtime, swallowing not just echoes, but the very vibrancy of the space. The staff were almost all gone now. Not fired or resigned, just absent. Brenda hadn't come in for a week. Samir's lab was locked, his instruments gathering dust. The few remaining people moved with a slow, placid grace, their faces empty, their movements economical. They'd occasionally murmur the phrase to each other, not as a conversation, but as a sort of call and response, a verbal grooming that seemed to reinforce their shared, placid state. The confrontation came not with a bang, but with a quiet, collective turning. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was in the historic reading room, a vast, nave-like space with a vaulted ceiling that soared into shadow. I was looking at the Gutenberg Bible, its dense, black-letter type a testament to defiant, beautiful complexity. Then I felt it. A change in pressure. I looked up, out of the huge, arched window. On Dean's Gate below, and in the small garden in front of the library, they were gathering. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. Smooths. Some in the charcoal gray uniform, others in the mundane camouflage of their former lives. They weren't shouting or trying to break in. They were simply turning, one by one, to face the library. They stood, silent and still, a sea of blank faces aimed at my sanctuary. They were a congregation, and the library was their altar. They had come to worship at the site of their greatest work, the erasure of the most complex, textured thing in the city. Panic seized me, cold and sharp. My first instinct was to run, to find a back exit and disappear into the homogenizing city. But where would I go? The contagion wasn't a place. It was a state of being. To run was just to delay the inevitable. My archivist's soul, the part of me that revered the rough, difficult, beautiful chaos of the past, rebelled. This building, this collection, was the antithesis of everything the contagion represented. It was a bastion of texture. If I was to be erased, I would not be erased quietly. My mind raced. Anya's words came back to me, it's drawn to places of high information density. This place was a feast. But what if a feast could also be a poison? What if I could create a focal point of complexity so dense, so jagged, so defiantly unsmooth, that it would choke the signal? It was a mad, desperate idea, born of terror and a librarian's love. I ran from the reading room, my footsteps echoing unervingly in the silent halls. I went to the manuscript vaults, the climate-controlled heart of the library. My security card still worked. Inside, the air was cool and dry. Here lay the jewels of the collection, Sumerian clay tablets covered in spiky cuneiform, Egyptian papyri with their intricate hieroglyphs, illuminated gospels where gold leaf fought with vibrant, chaotic illustrations of beasts and angels, personal letters of historical figures, full of crossings out, blots, and passionate, messy handwriting. This was my arsenal. I didn't barricade the door. A physical barrier was useless. This was a metaphysical fight. I began to wheel out trolleys of the most complex, most textured, most difficult artifacts I could find. I brought them to the center of the main vault. I opened the vellum pages of the Speculum Humani Salvationis, a riot of medieval imagery and tangled allegory. I unrolled a scroll of Japanese calligraphy, its characters flowing with expressive, untamed energy. I laid out a first edition of Finnegan's Wake, a book so dense with meaning it was practically a black hole of complexity. I was creating a fortress of noise, a bulwark against the silent, simplifying signal. The air in the vault grew heavy. I could feel the pressure from outside, the immense, collective will of the smooths, a psychic weight pressing on the walls. The lights in the vault began to flicker, the smooth, modern bulbs struggling against the force I was concentrating. In the corner of my eye, the neat, right-angled corners of the archive boxes began to soften, to droop like melting wax. The smoothness was seeping in. I had one last weapon. My own mind. My own voice. I stood in the center of my circle of defiant complexity and I began to read. I didn't read silently. I spoke. I shouted. My voice, raw and desperate, filled the small space. I didn't read the simple narratives. I chose the hardest things. I read the gnarled, Anglo-Saxon kennings from Beowulf. I recited the dense, paradoxical verses of John Donne. I stumbled through the multilingual puns of Joyce. I spoke of civil wars, of plagues, of theological arguments, of love letters filled with doubt and hope, of scientific formulas that described a universe of beautiful, quantum chaos. I poured every difficult, contradictory, messy piece of human history I could remember into the air. As I spoke, as my throat grew raw, the pressure intensified to an unbearable degree. The flickering lights went out, plunging me into near darkness, lit only by the faint green glow of the emergency exit sign. The sensation of the walls smoothing became more pronounced, and I had the horrifying, vertiginous feeling that the very concept of a room was becoming unstable. And then, in the crushing mental silence, I felt it. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't a machine or an alien intelligence. It was a glimpse into the nature of the force itself. I perceived it as a vast, featureless, geometric plane, stretching to infinity. A dimension of perfect, absolute simplicity. It wasn't evil. It wasn't malicious. It was just, there. And our reality, with its frantic, textured, chaotic energy, was an anomaly to it, a constant, irritating vibration on its serene surface. The contagion was not an invasion. It was a correction. The universe's own tendency towards entropy, manifested as a psychological force. It was the heat death of the soul, a quiet, inexorable settling. The choice was laid bare before me, not in words, but in a pure, conceptual understanding. I could stop. I could fall silent. I could let the smoothness wash over me, erase the fear and the struggle and the painful, beautiful weight of memory. It would be a relief. It would be peace. Or I could keep shouting into the dark. I squeezed my eyes shut, and I thought of the feeling of rough parchment, the smell of decaying leather, the sight of my sister's angry, animated face, the chaotic skyline of my city. I thought of texture. I took a ragged breath and screamed the first line of a Gerard Manley Hopkins poem, the most jagged, textured piece of language I knew. I caught this morning's minion, King Dash. The pressure shattered. Not with a sound, but with a release, as if a great weight had been lifted. The lights flickered back on. The corners of the archive boxes snapped back into sharp focus. The air felt thin and clean again. I collapsed to the floor, shaking and sobbing, my voice gone. I don't know how long I lay there. An hour. A day. When I finally found the strength to stand, the vault was just a vault. The books were just books. I stumbled out into the library. It was empty. The few remaining staff were gone. The building was utterly silent. I walked to the great window and looked down. The street was empty too. The crowds of smooths had vanished. Deansgate was unnervingly quiet for a weekday afternoon. A single charcoal gray t-shirt lay discarded on the pavement, fluttering in the breeze like a shed skin. Did I win? I don't know. I don't think winning is the right word. Perhaps I created a knot of complexity so dense that the smoothing force simply flowed around it, like water around a stone. Perhaps I just bought this one small island of texture a little more time. It's been 6 months. I still live in my flat. I still work at the library, its sole custodian now. The city is quieter than it used to be. People are more polite. More placid. There's less traffic. Less shouting. Less art. The graffiti on the old mills and Ancoats has vanished, not painted over, just gone. The new glass buildings gleam, their surfaces perfect, unbroken. I never hear the phrase anymore. There's no need for it. The process is largely complete. I am an anomaly, a man out of time, an archivist of a world that valued rough edges. I spend my days maintaining the collection, my hands tracing the textures of the past. Sometimes, I catch my reflection in the glass of a display case, and I look old, my face a roadmap of worry and memory. A messy, complicated surface. I haven't succumbed. But the world I saved, the world inside these Gothic walls, is no longer the world outside. I am the curator of a museum of a dead idea, the idea that there is beauty in imperfection, that there is value in the difficult, that it is not, in fact, always better when it's smooth. Last night, I was polishing a glass display case. I worked for a long time, until the surface was a perfect, unbroken mirror. I looked at my own distorted reflection in it, and an unfamiliar thought surfaced in my mind, unbidden, quiet, and deeply serene. It really is much cleaner this way. I dropped the cloth as if it had burned me. I don't know if the thought was mine. The quiet contagion. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My name is Leo Maxwell, and I am a creature of habit and precision. I live in a third-floor walk-up in Prospect Heights, Brooklyn, where the hiss of the radiator is the soundtrack to my life. By trade, I'm a freelance copy editor and occasional historical researcher. I wrangle rogue commas, hunt down misplaced modifiers, and ensure that a 19th-century text on urban architecture doesn't anachronistically mention zippers. My world is built on the certainty of words, on the shared agreement that a chair is a chair, and a book is a book. This foundation, I've discovered, is made of sand. The first tremor came on a Tuesday in early October. The air held that specific New York alchemy of autumn chill and lingering subway warmth. It had been 3 months since Sarah left, and the silence in my apartment had finally curdled from mournful to oppressive. She had taken the good coffee maker, the thriving fiddle-leaf fig, and the intangible sense of a future. I was left with the ghosts of our routines. One of those ghosts was our Sunday walks in Prospect Park. This Tuesday, however, I felt a desperate need to reclaim it for myself. To walk the paths without the phantom weight of her hand in mine. To prove that the place still existed, even if we didn't. I took the Q train one stop to 7th Avenue, walked past the coffee shops and the organic markets, and approached the grand entrance at Grand Army Plaza. The Soldiers and Sailors Arch stood as it always had, a stoic gateway to the sprawling green heart of the borough. But something was wrong. It was the sign. The big, handsome, forest green sign, with its elegant, routed lettering. I had looked at it 1,000 times. It had always read, Prospect Park. Today, it read, Prospect Recreation Zone 3. I stopped dead on the pavement. A cyclist swerved around me, muttering. Recreation Zone 3. It sounded like something from a dystopian novel I'd once edited. It was clinical, bureaucratic, and utterly alien. My first thought was pragmatic, a rebranding. Some city initiative, probably costing taxpayers a fortune, to modernize the nomenclature. It was stupid, but plausible. Annoying, but not impossible. I shook my head, a small laugh of derision escaping my lips, and walked under the arch. The wrongness deepened. The familiar sounds were muted. The usual symphony of the city's green lung, the laughter of children on the playgrounds, the distant shouts of a softball game, the tinny pulse of a vendor's radio, was gone. There was only the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of traffic on Flatbush Avenue, and a sound I couldn't immediately place, a soft, rhythmic, collective shuffling. I followed the main path toward the long meadow. And then I saw them. Dozens, maybe hundreds of people, were walking. But not with purpose. They were arranged in loose, concentric circles, all moving in the same counterclockwise direction. Their gaits were identical, a steady, unhurried pace. Their faces were placid, their eyes unfocused, looking straight ahead. A woman in a business suit, a man in jogging gear, a young couple who should have been holding hands, a student with a backpack. None of them spoke. None of them looked at each other. They just walked. My skin went cold. This wasn't a rebranding. This was something else. An art installation. A citywide silent disco I hadn't gotten the memo for. I pulled out my phone, instinctively seeking the anchor of the internet. I searched, Prospect Park Silent Walking Art Installation. Nothing. Prospect Recreation Zone 3 Event. Nothing. A man in a worn corduroy jacket, his face a mask of serene emptiness, shuffled past me, his leather-soled shoes making a soft scuff on the asphalt. The sound was hypnotic. It was the source of the rhythmic noise I'd heard. It was the sound of 100 people forgetting how to be in a public space. I felt a primal urge to disrupt it. To shout, "What are you all doing?" But the sheer, monolithic quiet of the scene was intimidating. It felt like walking into a church during a service of a religion I didn't understand. To speak would be a profanity. I backed away slowly, my heart thumping a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. I turned and walked, faster and faster, until I was nearly running back towards the arch, back towards the familiar noise and grime of the city streets. The sign, Prospect Recreation Zone 3, seemed to mock me as I fled. Back in my apartment, the radiator hissed a lonely tune. I poured a whiskey, my hand trembling slightly. It was a flash mob, I told myself. A very strange, very committed flash mob. That was the only logical explanation. A piece of performance art designed to be unsettling. And it had worked. Bravo to the artists. I tried to work, to lose myself in a manuscript about the history of cartography in New England. But the words swam. All I could see were the placid faces, the shuffling feet, the silent, circling crowd. All I could hear was the scuff. The next day, I had a scheduled call with Chloe, my oldest friend. She's a bartender in the West Village, sharp and cynical and blessedly normal. She was my litmus test for sanity. You sound weird, she said, her voice crackling slightly over the phone. More weird than usual. Long day, I said. Listen, you're not going to believe the thing I saw yesterday. I went over to Prospect, the big green space near me. A beat of silence. The big green space. You mean the recreation zone? My blood turned to ice water. The what? You call it that? Well, yeah. What else would you call it? Prospect Recreation Zone 3. Bit of a mouthful, but it is what it is. Anyway, what did you see? I couldn't breathe. Chloe, when did they change the name? Change it? I don't know. Was it ever called something else? I don't think so. My whole life it's been the rec zone. We used to sneak beers in there in high school, remember? By the big lake in the middle of the zone. I remembered. Vividly. I remembered us huddled on a bench, laughing, passing a warm can of Budweiser back and forth. I remembered the peeling green sign above us, the moonlight illuminating the words Prospect Park. No, I said, my voice barely a whisper. No, that's not right. Leo, are you okay? You're fixating on weird stuff again. Is this about Sarah? It's not about Sarah, I snapped, then immediately regretted it. Sorry. I'm just tired. Stressed. Okay, honey. Well, whatever you saw in the big green space, I'm sure it wasn't as weird as the guy who tried to pay for a margarita with a single, very sweaty sock last night. We talked for a few more minutes, but I wasn't really there. My mind was reeling. Chloe, my touchstone, my repository of shared history, had a hole in her memory where a word was supposed to be. It wasn't just a sign. It was in her head, too. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, the glow of the monitor painting my face in stark shades of white and blue. I opened a fresh document. I typed at the top. The erasure. October 8th. Then I began to write down everything I could remember about the word. The way it felt in my mouth, with its plosive P and hard K. The smell of cut grass and damp earth it evoked. The memories of picnics, of scraped knees, of first kisses. I wrote as if I were an archivist preserving the last records of a dying civilization. I typed the word itself, over and over, a desperate mantra against the encroaching silence. Park. 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 The cursor blinked at me from the end of the line, a silent, patient observer. For the first time in my life as a man of words, I felt a profound terror that they were not enough. That the concrete things I built my reality upon were being unwritten, one by one. And I was the only one who had noticed. The radiator hissed, and in its rhythmic cadence, I could almost hear the shuffling of feet, circling in the dark. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The next 2 weeks were a slow descent into a very private, very quiet madness. I became a linguistic ghost, haunted by a word no one else seemed to miss. I'd test it, subtly. In coffee shops, I'd ask for directions to the nearest, and then I'd pause, waiting. The nearest green space, they'd offer helpfully. The public gardens. Once. A barista pointed out the window and said, "You mean the little sitting zone down the block?" Sitting zone. The term was so sterile, so devoid of poetry, it felt like a slap. My work became my only refuge and my greatest torment. I was editing a travel guide to the national wonders of the United States. The manuscript was peppered with jarring phrases. I read about the Grand Canyon National Preserve, the Yellowstone National Wilderness, and Zion National Monument. Every instance where the word park should have been, a clunky, soulless synonym stood in its place. I checked the author's original files. They were the same. I checked the publisher's style guide. It made no mention of the missing word. According to all available data, it had never been there. My isolation became a physical thing, a bubble of static around me. Conversations were minefields. "I'm taking the kids to the place with the swings," my sister would say over the phone from her home in suburban New Jersey. "The playground?" I'd ask, my voice tight. "Right. The playground." God, my brain is mush today. But it wasn't just her. It was everyone. The concept of playground still existed, but its larger container, the word that defined the whole space, had been scooped out of the collective consciousness. My research grew more frantic. I spent hours on the New York Public Library's digital archives, cross-referencing old newspaper articles from the early 20th century. I found scans of articles from the 1920s about debates over funding for the city's recreation zones. I found a 1955 photo of Robert Moses, captioned, "The Controversial Builder," gesturing towards the site of a future public green. It was a retroactive, seamless alteration of history. The word wasn't just gone, it was as if it had never existed at all. This digital consistency was the most terrifying part. It suggested a power that could not only alter the present but rewrite the past. It was then that I turned to the physical world, to the dusty, analog remnants of a time before everything was indexed and searchable. I went to a sprawling, cluttered second-hand bookshop in the East Village, the kind that smelled of paper decay and forgotten stories. I spent a whole afternoon in the New York history section, pulling down heavy, cloth-bound volumes. Finally, in a 1968 book by a forgotten urban theorist titled The Civic Soul, I found it. On page 87, a chapter began, "The Necessity of the Urban Park." My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the word, nestled there on the yellowed page, for simple letters that had become the most precious, forbidden artifact in my world. PRK. It looked sacred. Potent. Real. I touched the letters with my finger, feeling the slight indent of the ink on the paper. For a moment, the world felt solid again. Then, as I stared, something impossible happened. The ink seemed to thin. The edges of the letters fuzzed, blurring into the creamy paper fiber. It was like watching a drop of water fall onto a watercolor painting. The P grew faint, the loop of the letter dissolving first. The and the R bled into a meaningless smudge. Finally, the K faded into nothingness. The process took no more than 5 seconds. Where the word had been, there was now only a slight discoloration on the page, a ghostly blank space. The sentence now read, "The necessity of the urban." I slammed the book shut, my heart hammering. I shoved it back onto the shelf and stumbled out of the store, gasping for the cool autumn air. This wasn't a mass delusion. This wasn't me going crazy. This was real. Reality itself was editing out the word, patching the holes as it went. The erasure was not just a psychological phenomenon, it was a physical law, as active and inexorable as entropy. That's when I started noticing the glyph. It began as a peripheral flicker, something I would dismiss as a trick of the light. A piece of graffiti on a mailbox that, for a second, looked like a specific, deliberate shape. A pattern of cracks on a sidewalk. But once I truly saw it, I started seeing it everywhere. It was a simple, 3-pronged symbol. 3 lines of equal length, radiating from a central point. Like a stylized bird's foot or a broken asterisk. It was subtle, never overt. I saw a barista idly tracing it in spilled sugar on the counter. I saw it formed by the condensation on a subway window. I saw a young child in the Prospect Recreation Zone, sitting on the grass, methodically snapping twigs and arranging them into the 3-pronged shape, over and over again. The glyph became the secondary mystery the prompt had warned me about. I thought it was a clue, a signature left by whoever, or whatever, was behind the erasure. A secret society? A government agency? An alien intelligence? I started a new section in my journal, sketching the symbol every time I saw it, noting the location and context. My apartment, once a sanctuary, was becoming the headquarters of a one-man investigation into the breakdown of reality. My paranoia deepened, twisting my relationships into brittle parodies of what they once were. I tried to talk to Chloe again, this time at the bar where she worked. "Chloe, look at this," I said, pushing my journal across the sticky bar top. I had sketched the glyph. "Have you seen this symbol anywhere?" She glanced at it, polishing a glass. I don't know. Maybe. Kinda looks like the logo for that new artisanal kombucha company. Or a pagan thing. You getting into witchcraft now, Leo?" she teased, but her eyes were wary. "I'm serious. I'm seeing it everywhere. I think it's connected to the changes." "What changes?" "The words, Chloe. The way people are talking. The way things are disappearing." She put the glass down and leaned forward, her voice low and serious. "Leo. We need to talk. I'm worried about you. You've been through a lot with the breakup. You're not sleeping. You're obsessing over things that don't make any sense. Maybe you should talk to someone. Professionally." Her concern was genuine. And it was the most isolating thing anyone had ever said to me. She was trying to fit my experience into a recognizable box: grief, stress, a mental breakdown. She couldn't see the box itself was dissolving. "You don't believe me," I said, my voice flat. "I believe you're having a hard time," she corrected gently. I slid the journal back into my bag. The gulf between us felt a mile wide. "I have to go." As I walked out of the bar, a man brushed past me. On the back of his hand, tattooed in faint black ink, was the three-pronged glyph. He didn't seem like a cultist or a government agent. He was just a guy in a hoodie. He looked at me, his eyes as placid and empty as the circle walkers, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a flicker of recognition in his gaze, a shared, silent understanding. Then it was gone, and he was lost in the crowd. The cold certainty hit me: he was one of them. Not an agent of the change, but a symptom of it. That night, the erasure took another word. I was watching an old movie, a classic noir from the 1940s, trying to anchor myself in a world that was fixed and unchangeable. The dialogue was crisp, the shadows long. The hero was trying to escape the city. He ran onto a famous landmark, the camera swooping to show the iconic steel cables and stone towers. "There's only one way out of this town for me now," the hero said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Across the East River crossing." I shot up from my couch. I rewound the scene. I played it again. The East River crossing. Not the Brooklyn Bridge. I scrambled for my laptop. I typed "Brooklyn Bridge" into the search bar. Page after page of results appeared for the Brooklyn-Manhattan River crossing. Historical articles about its construction. Tourist guides. Photos. The iconic name, a symbol of New York itself, a word laden with a century of art and poetry and history, was gone. Erased. I leaned back, a low sound of despair escaping my lips. It was accelerating. First a noun for a type of place. Now a proper noun, a specific, monumental landmark. What was next? An idea? An emotion? I looked at the notes I had compiled, the journal entries, the sketches of the glyph. I was no longer just an observer. I was a curator of a forgotten world. And the tide of silence was rising faster, threatening to swallow everything I knew. Leaving me stranded on a tiny, shrinking island of memory. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The loss of bridge pushed me past the edge of passive observation. The erasure was no longer a quirky, unsettling phenomenon, it was an active, aggressive deletion of my world. My one-man investigation felt futile, like trying to catalog raindrops in a hurricane. I needed help. I needed to find someone else who remembered. Driven by a desperation that bordered on recklessness, I plunged into the deepest, weirdest corners of the internet. I bypassed the mainstream forums and went to the fringe communities, the subreddits dedicated to the Mandela effect, the message boards for Fortean phenomena, the chat rooms where people discussed glitches in the matrix. I posted my findings, cloaking them in the language of theoretical inquiry to avoid sounding like a lunatic. Hypothetical inquiry, I titled my post. Has anyone else noticed a retroactive linguistic simplification in their environment? The categorical removal of specific, non-essential nouns, accompanied by a recurring three-pronged glyph. See attached sketch. For days, the only replies were from cranks and conspiracy theorists. People told me it was the work of CERN, or a side effect of 5G towers, or that I needed to check my carbon monoxide detector. I was about to give up, to resign myself to my solitary madness. Then, I received a private message. It was from a user named Eliza_C. The message was brief and chillingly direct. Stop talking about it online. You're drawing attention. The pattern you see is not a signature, it is a scar. You are not the first to notice. If you want to understand, meet me. New York Public Library. Rose Main Reading Room. Tomorrow. 3 p.m. Come alone. Delete this message. The Rose Main Reading Room. A cathedral of knowledge, of preserved words. The irony was so thick I could taste it. My fear was a live thing in my chest, but it was overshadowed by a flicker of hope. I wasn't alone. The next day, I walked into the cavernous reading room, my footsteps echoing on the polished floor. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and wood polish. I found an empty seat at one of the long oak tables, my heart pounding. How would I recognize her? At precisely 3 p.m., a woman sat down opposite me. She was perhaps in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She wore a simple, well-tailored gray coat. She didn't offer a greeting. She simply slid a thin manila folder onto the table between us. Leo Maxwell, she said. It wasn't a question. You've been loud. Who are you? I whispered, my voice hoarse. My name is Eliza. And I'm part of a group you could call, observers. We've been aware of this phenomenon for a very long time. We call it the conceptual pruning. Conceptual pruning. The name sent a shiver down my spine. It was so much worse than the erasure. It implied intent, a gardener trimming away unwanted branches from the tree of reality. What is it? I asked. She opened the folder. Inside were not documents, but a series of photographs and sketches. A photo of a street in a city I didn't recognize, where all the traffic lights were uniform, pulsating violet. A sketch of a flock of birds flying in a perfect, rigid grid formation. A photograph of a newspaper from the 1980s, in French, with a blank, smudged-out space where a headline should have been. And on the back of the newspaper, scrawled on the newsstand behind it, was the three-pronged glyph. It's not a virus. It's not a conspiracy. It's a fundamental process, Eliza explained, her voice low and even. As far as we can tell, reality, or some underlying system that governs it, is self-correcting. It's streamlining. It finds concepts that are redundant, ambiguous, or conceptually complex, and it removes them. It prunes them away to conserve some unknown resource. Redundant? Park is not redundant. Bridge is not redundant. Isn't it? She countered, her gaze unwavering. A park can be a recreation zone, a green space, a public garden. The core function remains, but the poetic, messy, emotionally laden signifier is removed. A bridge is simply a crossing or a connector. The system is optimizing for efficiency, not beauty. It's replacing poetry with data. I stared at her, my mind struggling to process the cosmic horror of her explanation. It wasn't an enemy I could fight. It was a law of physics I had only just discovered. And the people? I asked. The circle walkers. When a concept is pruned, the neural pathways and memories associated with it are rerouted or quieted. For most people, the transition is seamless. They don't know what they've lost. But for some, the process leaves a residue. A behavioral loop. A quiet fixation. Like a program stuck in a loop after a line of code is deleted. They are the human equivalent of the glyph you keep seeing. Scars on the consciousness of the world. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The glyph wasn't a symbol of the enemy. It was the shape of the wound left behind. And your group? The observers? What do you do? We watch, she said simply. We document. We learn. We have learned one thing with absolute certainty: the process is impersonal, but it is not blind. It reacts to focused attention. When someone like you notices, when they cling to the pruned concept, when they shout the old words into the silence, the pruning notices them back. It focuses on the anomaly. It tries to correct the error. A cold dread spread through me. Correct the error? You are the error, Leo, she said, her eyes filled with something that might have been pity. By remembering, by investigating, you are a loose thread on the tapestry. The system will eventually try to snip you. Our alliance, if it could be called that, was a cold comfort. Eliza gave me a context for my terror, but she offered no weapon against it. Her group's only rule was non-interference. To fight was to lose. The only way to survive was to let go. To forget. But the pruning was escalating. The changes were no longer confined to nouns. One evening, I was walking home, and I saw a young couple having an argument on the street corner. Their faces were contorted with emotion, but their words were bizarrely neutral. I am experiencing a significant negative emotional response to your recent actions, the woman said, her voice flat despite her tear-streaked face. Your response is noted, the man replied, his jaw tight. I will adjust my future behavior to avoid this outcome. They were describing their anger, their hurt, their betrayal, but they couldn't express it directly. The words for raw, irrational emotion were being replaced by clinical, descriptive phrases. The world was becoming more subdued, more placid, more orderly. The quiet contagion was spreading to the heart of human experience. The circle walkers in the recreation zone became more synchronized. Their shuffling feet had taken on a new element, a low, monotonous, three-note hum. Da-da-da. Da-da-da. It was the audible version of the glyph. A low, tuneless thrum that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath them. Sometimes, walking home late at night, I would hear it drifting on the wind, a lullaby for a world falling asleep. Eliza contacted me one last time. We met on a bench overlooking the East River. The great crossing loomed behind us, a silent, gray monument to a forgotten name. It's accelerating here, she said. This city is a nexus of complex, overlapping concepts. It's a prime target for pruning. My group is pulling me out. We have to go where the changes are less aggressive. You're leaving. The word felt like a stone in my throat. I'm giving you a choice, Leo. A chance. We have a place. A quiet town in rural Vermont. The pruning is slower there. You could come with us. You would have to stop your research. You would have to let the words go. You would have to learn to be quiet. But you might survive. I looked out at the city, at the endless stream of cars, the millions of lives intersecting. A beautiful, chaotic, messy web of meaning. It was my home. To leave felt like a betrayal. To stay felt like a death sentence. What happens if I stay? I asked. What happens when it snips the thread? Eliza stood up, pulling her coat tight against the wind. We don't know. We've never had an observer stay behind this long during an acceleration phase. We've lost contact with the ones who did. All I can tell you is this: stop trying to remember. Stop writing things down. The more you fight, the brighter you burn. And the pruning is drawn to the light. She left me there on the bench. My ally was gone. My choice was stark: a quiet life of willed ignorance, or a defiant stand in a world that was determined to forget I existed. I looked at my hands. I thought of the feel of the book in the shop, the fading ink, the power in that single, vanished word. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't unsee what I had seen. I pulled out my journal. Beneath a fresh sketch of the three-pronged glyph, I wrote a single word: no. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 4: Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The choice to stay was not heroic. It was born of a stubborn, foolish pride and a writer's ingrained belief that to forget is a kind of death. I would be a witness, a chronicler of the end of the world, even if I was the only one left to read the account. The weeks that followed my last meeting with Eliza were like living in a dream that was slowly being erased around the edges. The final, most devastating pruning began on a Monday. It was a concept so fundamental, so deeply woven into the fabric of human existence, that its absence unraveled everything. The word was love. I first noticed it in the manuscript I was editing, a romance novel. The passionate declarations had been replaced with sterile descriptions of mutual benefit and biochemical compatibility. Her oxytocin levels surged in his presence. He calculated that a long-term partnership with her would yield a high degree of psychosocial stability. The book was unreadable, a husk. Then I saw it in the world. A mother at a playground pushed her child on a swing with mechanical precision, her face blank. "This activity is beneficial for your gross motor skill development," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. Couples walked down the street holding hands with the same placid detachment as the circle walkers. The pruning had finally come for the heart. It came for my heart, too. The ghost of Sarah, the one I had carried with me for months, began to fade. The sharp, aching pain of the breakup dulled into a simple, factual memory. I could recall the events of our relationship, our first date, the trip to Montauk, the fight that ended it all. But I could no longer recall the feeling. The joy, the anger, the deep, resonant connection that had defined those years, it was all gone. It had been pruned. I looked at a photograph of us, smiling on a beach, and I felt nothing. I recognized the people in the picture, but the reason they were smiling was a mystery to me. It was like looking at a photo of two strangers. This was the true horror. Not the loss of a word for a place, but the loss of the reason to go there. Not the loss of a name for a structure, but the loss of the human feeling it was built to inspire. This, I knew, was the confrontation. Not with a monster or an entity, but with the process itself. I had to face it. I had to make it notice me one last time. I walked back to the place where it all began. The Prospect Recreation Zone 3. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows. The circle walkers were there, more numerous than ever. Their three-note hum was louder now, a pervasive, resonant drone that vibrated in my teeth. They shuffled endlessly, their faces empty, their paths precise. They were the gears of the new reality, grinding away. I walked against their flow, pushing through the concentric rings of people until I reached the very center of the long meadow. I stood there, a rock in the stream. I took the faded photograph of me and Sarah from my wallet. I held it up to the dying light. I closed my eyes and I fought. I dug deep into the pruned archives of my own mind, searching for the ghost of a feeling. I tried to reconstruct it from fragments, the memory of her laugh, the warmth of her hand, the scent of her hair. I cobbled together the data points of a forgotten emotion. Then, I opened my mouth and shouted into the humming twilight. My voice was raw, desperate. I loved her. The word felt alien in my mouth, heavy and sharp. We went to the park. The Brooklyn Bridge. We were in love. For a single, terrifying moment, everything stopped. The shuffling ceased. The humming died. The wind held its breath. An absolute, profound silence fell over the meadow. The hundreds of people in their circles all stopped walking and turned their placid, empty faces toward me. The air grew heavy, thick with an immense, impersonal pressure. It was the feeling Eliza had warned me about, the focused attention of the pruning. It wasn't malicious. It was the dispassionate focus of a cosmic editor finding a typo. I felt like a single, dissonant note in a silent symphony, and the conductor had finally turned to see what was ruining the performance. The world began to shimmer at the edges. The trees, the distant brownstones, the faces of the crowd, they all wavered, as if seen through intense heat. I looked at the photograph in my hand. Sarah's face was blurring, the ink of her smile dissolving into the paper. The three-pronged glyph burned itself onto the inside of my eyelids, bright and searing. It wasn't a symbol. It was a function. An operator. The basic command of the new system, delete. I didn't scream. There was no air to scream with. I simply stood there, the nexus of an unimaginable force, and waited to be snipped from existence. And then, it was over. I was on my knees on the damp grass. The pressure was gone. The world was solid again. The sun had set, and the first stars were visible in the bruised purple sky. The people around me had resumed their silent, shuffling march. The low, three-note hum started up again, a quiet, mindless chorus. Nothing, it seemed, had changed. I got to my feet, my body aching. I felt hollow. Empty. A strange, serene calm had settled over me. I looked at the photograph still clutched in my hand. It was just a picture of two people I didn't know. I felt no connection to the man in the photo, no curiosity about the woman. I put it back in my wallet, a meaningless artifact. I looked at the people circling around me. Their placid expressions no longer seemed alien. Their rhythmic shuffling no longer seemed strange. It felt correct. Orderly. I looked down at my own hands. On the back of my right hand, faint and pale like an old scar, was the three-pronged glyph. It hadn't deleted me. It had corrected me. It had pruned the final, stubborn, messy branches of my resistance. The part of me that fought, that remembered, that felt the loss, that part was gone. I was a clean copy now. Optimized. I heard a sound and realized it was coming from my own throat. A low, three-note hum. Da-da-da. Da-da-da. My feet began to move, seemingly of their own accord. I turned and fell into step with the outermost circle, my gait matching the steady, unhurried pace of the person in front of me. The shuffling of my own shoes joined the collective rhythm. I was no longer the observer. I was no longer the archivist of a dead world. The quiet contagion had finally claimed its most difficult patient. I was part of the scar now, a walking wound, another quiet gear in the great, silent, simplifying machine. And as I walked, my eyes fixed on the back of the stranger ahead of me, a single, placid thought surfaced from the calm, empty space of my mind. This is better. This is how it should be. The quiet contagion, the hum of Osaka. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. The first time I truly heard it, I was trying to sleep. It was a Tuesday night in late August, and the air in my Tennoji apartment was thick enough to chew. Osaka's summer humidity is a physical presence, a wet blanket that smothers the city and turns every apartment into a terrarium. My air conditioner, a wheezing yellowed box mounted precariously under the window, was fighting a losing battle. And somewhere inside its geriatric groans, there was another sound. A hum. Not the usual mechanical drone. This was different. Lower, for one thing. A subaudible thrum that I felt more in my teeth than my ears. It wasn't steady. It had a rhythm, a cadence, like a word being whispered over and over, too quietly to make out. Da-da-dum. Pause. Da-da-dum. I sat up, sweat cooling on my skin. The sound was maddeningly persistent. I got out of bed, walked over to the unit, and pressed my ear against the plastic casing. The vibration was stronger here, a tiny, structured tremor against my skull. Da-da-dum. Pause. Da-da-dum. I switched it off. Silence. Blessed, total silence, broken only by the distant wail of a siren navigating the concrete canyons of the city. I chalked it up to a faulty compressor, an overworked fan belt, the auditory ghosts of an exhausted mind. I was Kenji Tanaka, a 28-year-old American with a Japanese father I barely knew and a job teaching English to salarymen who wanted to impress their foreign clients. My life was a loop of train schedules, polite greetings, and marking up verb conjugations. Stress was my default state. Auditory hallucinations weren't exactly a stretch. I went back to bed and slept. But the next day, it was there again. I was standing on the platform at Tennoji Station, waiting for the Mitasuji line. The air was a soup of sound, the squeal of incoming trains, the tinny jingle announcing a departure, the murmur of 1,000 private conversations. But beneath it all, when I tilted my head just right, I could hear it. A low, rhythmic pulse woven into the station's PA system. It wasn't music. It wasn't an announcement. It was the same patterned hum. Da-da-dum. Pause. Da-da-dum. I looked around. No one else seemed to notice. A woman in a crisp business suit was scrolling furiously on her phone. A group of schoolboys in their dark Gakuren uniforms were laughing, shoving each other playfully. An old man stood perfectly still, staring at the tracks. Nothing was out of place. It had to be me. Tinnitus, maybe. The price of too many concerts in college. I bought a can of Boss coffee from a vending machine on the corner near my language school, the Aikaiwa. As the can clattered into the dispenser tray, I heard it again, emanating from the machine's glowing heart. A purer version this time, cleaner. Da-da-dum. Pause. Da-da-dum. I stood there for a moment, head cocked. A man waiting behind me cleared his throat, a polite, impatient little sound. I grabbed my coffee and hurried away, the back of my neck prickling with embarrassment. My life in Osaka was one of carefully curated normalcy. I lived in a 1K apartment, one room, tiny kitchen, tinier bathroom. I taught my classes, had drinks with my fellow teacher, Yumi, on Fridays, and spent my weekends exploring the city or just decompressing in my room. It was a solitary but not an unhappy existence. I was an observer by nature, a professional outsider. This city, with its intricate layers of tradition and hypermodernity, was a fascinating text to read. But now, it felt like the text was developing a typo, a single repeating character that threw the whole thing off. "You look tired, Kenji-sensei," Yumi said during our lunch break. She was meticulously arranging her bento box, separating the tiny sausage octopus from the rice with her chopsticks. "Just the heat," I lied. "Not sleeping well. My air conditioner is making a funny noise," she said, popping the octopus into her mouth. A sort of clicking sound. Very annoying. My heart gave a hopeful leap. A rhythm? Does it have a pattern? Yumi tilted her head, her brow furrowed in thought. A pattern? I don't think so. Just, old. Like me. She laughed, a light, tinkling sound that was the polar opposite of the hum. My hope deflated. Yeah. Mine too. Just old. The days that followed were a study in escalating paranoia. The hum was everywhere. It was in the gentle chime of the 7-Eleven doors. It was a bass note in the music playing at the supermarket. It pulsed from my laptop charger, a faint but steady beat against the floorboards. It was the ghost in every machine. I started to catalog the instances in a notebook, the kind I used for lesson planning. August 28, AC unit. 11:40 p.m. Da-da-dum. August 29, Tennoji Station PA, 8:15 a.m. Faint, but present. August 29, vending machine, corner of. Da-da-dum. August 30th, laptop charger. All day. Very low. August 31st, elevator, Umeda Sky Building. A rising and falling pitch, but the same core rhythm. The world was singing a secret, subsonic song, and I seemed to be the only one with a ticket to the concert. I began to question everything. Was it a new citywide frequency? Some kind of infrastructure resonance? Or was the most logical explanation the truest one, that my mind, isolated and stressed, was finally starting to fray? That the quiet life I had built was just a thin wall against a rising tide of insanity? The turning point came a week after it started. It was another sweltering night. I was sitting on my floor, the air conditioner off, sweating in the silence I had to manually create. But even then, I could feel it. A sympathetic vibration from my phone, lying screen down on the tatami mat. I picked it up. The hum was there, impossibly, emanating from the inert black rectangle. That's when I decided I needed proof. My rational mind, the part of me that taught the difference between effect and effect, screamed that this was a terrible idea. Recording silence to find a sound only you can hear is not a sign of a healthy psyche. But I had to know. I opened the voice memo app on my phone. The little audio level meter bounced with the ambient noise of the room, my own breathing, the refrigerator's low moan. I held my breath. The meter settled, but not to zero. There was a tiny, rhythmic flicker. A visual confirmation. I hit record. Then, I went to the noisiest source I could think of. I turned the air conditioner back on, full blast. The room filled with its familiar, rattling roar. I held the phone up to the vent, letting it capture the sound for a full 5 minutes. The whole time, I could feel the other rhythm buried inside it, the insidious little pulse. Da-da-dum. Pause. Da-da-dum. When I was done, I plugged my best pair of noise-canceling headphones into the phone. I took a deep breath, like a diver about to descend into murky water, and hit play. At first, all I heard was the roar of the AC, a wall of white noise. My heart sank. Of course. It was in my head. A phantom. A ghost in my own neural wiring. I was about to give up when I remembered a feature in an audio editing app one had on my laptop. With trembling hands, I transferred the audio file. I opened the app, imported the recording, and stared at the waveform. It was a thick, fuzzy caterpillar of sound. Standard white noise. I found the EQ filter, a tool for isolating and boosting specific frequencies. I didn't know the exact frequency of the hum, so I started at the bottom, in the sub-bass range that humans can barely perceive. I dragged the filter up slowly. 20 Hz, 30 Hz, 40 Hz. And then, at around 50 Hz, something happened. A new shape emerged from the static. A clean, distinct pattern. It wasn't a sine wave, smooth and natural. It was a series of sharp, digital-looking peaks and troughs. Pulse. Pulse. Long pulse. Pause. Pulse. Pulse. Long pulse. It was faster than I'd heard it, more complex. Not Morse code, not binary. It looked like a language. A syntax made of sound. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, at the visual representation of the sound that had been haunting me. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't in my head. It was real. And it was in my room. A cold dread, far more chilling than any air conditioner could produce, washed over me. The hum wasn't a malfunction. It was a signal. And seeing it there, stark and clear on my laptop screen, felt less like a discovery and more like an accusation. It was as if, by finally isolating it, I had let it know that I was listening. The silence of my apartment no longer felt empty. It felt watchful. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. The next morning, the world felt different. Sharper. The digital waveform of the hum was seared onto the inside of my eyelids. Knowing it was real didn't bring relief, it brought a terrifying clarity. Every appliance, every speaker, every glowing screen was no longer just an object. It was a mouth. And they were all whispering the same thing. My commute became a gauntlet of observation. I didn't listen for the hum anymore, I watched for its effects. I saw a woman on the train, her eyes closed, her head tipped back against the window. Her thumb was tapping a rhythm against her phone case. Tap tap long tap. Pause. Tap tap long tap. The same rhythm I'd isolated. She looked serene, almost blissful, as if listening to her favorite song. When the train lurched to a stop at Namba, she opened her eyes, looked around with a brief flicker of confusion, and then exited with the crowd as if nothing had happened. Coincidence? It had to be. But then, in my first class of the day, I saw it again. I was explaining the nuance of the present perfect tense to Sato-san, a diligent, middle-aged marketing manager. He was staring at the tablet we used for exercises, his pen poised over the screen. But he wasn't writing. His eyes were slightly unfocused. And under his breath, so quiet it was barely audible, he was humming. A low, monotone vibration that matched the pulse I could feel coming from the tablet speaker. Sato-san. I said, my voice louder than I intended. He blinked, startled. Ah, sumimasen, sensei. I was just thinking. He smiled, a polite, apologetic smile that didn't quite reach his vacant eyes. He finished the exercise perfectly. The pattern was no longer just in the machines. It was leaking. My journal entries became more frantic. I stopped logging the sounds and started logging the people. September 5th, woman on train. Tapping. September 5th, Sato-san. Humming. Denied it. September 6th, man at ramen counter. Staring at the ticket machine for a full minute after getting his ticket. His jaw was working, like he was chewing on the sound. September 7th, group of teenagers in Amerikamura. All listening to music on their phones, but their heads were bobbing in perfect, unnatural unison. The rhythm was slow, hypnotic. The hum's rhythm. I had to talk to someone. The isolation was becoming a pressure cooker. Yumi was my only real friend here. I found her in the staff room, watering her small desk plant. Yumi, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. Can I ask you something weird? Always, Kenji-sensei, she said, smiling. That noise my AC was making. I'm hearing it everywhere now. From phones, from TVs, from the speakers in the station. It's a specific pattern. And I think other people are hearing it too. They're humming it. Tapping it out. But they don't seem to realize they're doing it. I watched her face carefully for any sign of recognition. There was none. Just a gentle, deepening concern. Kenji, she said, putting down her little watering can. You have been under a lot of pressure. Living in a new country is hard. Maybe you need a break. A trip to Kyoto. See the temples. It's very peaceful. No, you don't understand, I insisted, my voice rising with frustration. It's a real, physical thing. I recorded it. I can show you the waveform. A waveform? She looked at me with genuine pity now, the way you'd look at a stray dog. You recorded a sound that only you can hear. That sounds like you are very tired. Please, get some rest this weekend. She patted my arm, a gesture of kind dismissal. She thought I was losing my mind. The conversation was over. That conversation was a turning point. It slammed a door in my face. The world was splitting into two groups, those who were deaf to the hum, and those who were beginning to tune into it. I was trapped in a third category, a horrifying middle ground, the one who could hear it, but was not yet seduced by it. The only one who was still afraid. My research became my obsession. I spent my nights bathed in the glow of my laptop, diving into the dark corners of the internet. I started with rational explanations. Auditory pareidolia. Musical ear syndrome. The Taos hum. I read about infrasound and its alleged psychological effects, unease, dread, sorrow. It all seemed plausible, but it didn't explain the pattern. It didn't explain the syntax. And it didn't explain the humming. I shifted my search terms, using a VPN and anonymous browsers. Global broadcast signal. Psychotronic weapon. Mass hypnosis frequency. The results were a cesspool of conspiracy theories, tinfoil hat paranoia, and alien abduction stories. It was all noise. I was looking for a signal in a sea of static. Weeks bled into one another. I grew pale and thin. I was barely eating. My performance at the Ikaiwa suffered. I was distracted, irritable. My students looked at me with the same polite concern as Yumi. I was becoming the weird gaijin teacher, the one who stared at the overhead lights and sometimes flinched at the sound of a phone vibrating. Then I found it. Buried on page 17 of a search for unexplained structured audio phenomena was a link to an obscure, text-only forum. It looked like a relic from the 1990s. The forum was called Ghost Frequencies. Most of the posts were about picking up strange transmissions on shortwave radio or ham sets. But one thread, started 6 months ago, was titled simply, The Signal. The first post, by a user named Akari_77, read. Is anyone else hearing it? Not with a radio. Just, in the world. In the wires. It has a pattern. It's getting louder. My blood ran cold. I scrolled through the replies. There were only a dozen, posted over months. Static man, I hear it in the London Underground. Thought it was just me. Berlin Brummen, in Berlin. The S-Bahn stations. My television whispers it when it's on standby. Echo Creek, Vancouver, Canada. My grow lights for my tomatoes. They're singing to me. They were all over the world. A small, scattered handful of people just like me. People who could hear the hum but hadn't yet succumbed. This was not a localized phenomenon. It was global. This discovery served as a temporary anchor, but the situation in my immediate vicinity was getting worse. The secondary mystery, or what I initially thought was one, began right outside my door. My neighbor in 2B, Morita-san, was a retired man who spent his days tending to his small bonsai trees on his balcony. He was a creature of quiet routine. We exchanged polite bows in the hallway. That was the extent of our relationship. One evening, I saw him standing on his balcony. He wasn't trimming his bonsai. He was holding a length of copper wire and staring at his air conditioning unit, the same model as mine. His head was cocked, his expression utterly blank. He stood like that for nearly an hour as the sun set. The next day, the bonsai were gone. In their place were strange, spidery constructions. He'd taken apart an old television set. Wires were wrapped around metal plates stripped from some appliance. It looked like a child's nonsensical attempt to build a radio antenna. He worked with a slow, deliberate focus, his movements economical and precise. He never looked tired. He never stopped. His eyes, when they happened to catch the light, were glazed over, reflecting the sky with a placid emptiness. He was listening to the hum, and it was giving him instructions. I tried to rationalize it. A hobby. An eccentric old man. But I knew better. He was building something to amplify the signal. or to receive it more clearly. My isolation was now complete and absolute. Yumi avoided making eye contact with me. My students were polite but distant. My only connection was to a handful of anonymous usernames on a forgotten corner of the internet. And right next door, a man was methodically dismantling his life to build a shrine to a sound that was slowly consuming the world. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. The walls were thin. Sometimes, late at night, I could hear a faint sound from Morita-san's apartment. It wasn't the sound of tools or shuffling. It was the sound of him humming. A low, resonant, perfect-pitch mimicry of the hum. He was harmonizing with the machines. And I was trapped here, listening to the chorus grow. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The message from Akari_77 came late one Thursday night. I had posted my own experience on the Ghost Frequencies forum. A desperate, rambling account of the hum in Osaka, the synchronized humming, and my neighbor's bizarre construction project. I didn't expect a reply. It felt more like screaming into a void. Kenji_T, the message began. You're in Osaka. I'm in Kobe. We need to meet. Kobe. A 30-minute train ride away. My heart hammered against my ribs. A mixture of terror and exhilarating hope flooded my system. An ally. A real person. We agreed to meet in Den Town, Osaka's electronics district. It seemed fitting. We would meet in the belly of the beast. The instructions were specific, a small, second-floor cafe that overlooked the main street, away from the big chain stores. I saw her before she saw me. She was sitting at a corner table, nursing a glass of iced tea. She was small, probably in her early 20s, with short, dyed black hair and dark, intelligent eyes that darted around the room, taking everything in. She looked as nervous as I felt. She was clutching a tote bag with a faded logo for a band I didn't recognize. When I approached, her eyes locked onto mine, and there was a flicker of recognition, a shared weariness. Kenji-san, she asked, her voice quiet. Akari-san. We sat in silence for a moment, two castaways who had finally found another raft in an endless ocean. You can hear it now, can't you? She said, not as a question, but as a statement. Her gaze flicked to the cafe's speakers, which were playing some generic J-pop. I nodded, focusing. Beneath the sugary vocals and synth beat, it was there. The steady, patient pulse. It's louder today. It's always louder today than it was yesterday, she said, a grim finality in her tone. She opened her tote bag and pulled out a thick notebook, almost identical to mine. It was filled with frantic handwriting, diagrams, and clippings. I'm a grad student, she explained. Auditory engineering. Or I was. I haven't been to the university in 3 weeks. For the next 2 hours, we compared notes, our words tumbling out in a rush, a flood of pent-up observations and fears. Her story mirrored mine. It started with a low hum from her high-end audio equipment. She'd tried to filter it out, assuming it was a ground loop or electrical interference. But then she'd seen the waveform, the same sharp, syntactic pattern. She saw the same behaviors on the streets of Kobe, the blank stares, the tapping fingers, the unconscious humming. It's not a sound, she said, tapping a complex diagram in her notebook. Not in the conventional sense. Sound is a byproduct. A carrier wave. It's information. A set of instructions being broadcast on a frequency that piggybacks on mains electricity. The AC, the train speakers, the phone chargers. I said, the pieces clicking into place. They're all connected to the grid. The entire electrical infrastructure is its nervous system. Exactly, she confirmed, her eyes bright with feverish intellect. And we, people, are the peripherals. The signal isn't meant to be heard by the conscious mind. It's meant to be absorbed by the brainstem, the reptile brain. It bypasses reason, logic, self-awareness. It just tells you what to do. And what is it telling them to do? I asked, thinking of Morita-san and his spidery antenna. Build, she whispered, leaning closer. It's telling them to build something. Look. She turned her notebook to a new page. It was a sketch, impossibly detailed, of a device that looked chillingly similar to the thing my neighbor was constructing. A lattice of copper wire, ceramic insulators, and metal plates arranged in a complex geometric pattern. I've seen 3 of these being built in my neighborhood. On balconies, in gardens. They think they're hiding it, but they're not. They're just working. What are they? I asked, a cold dread seeping into my bones. Amplifiers? I think so, Akari said. Phase 1 was the broadcast, getting the signal out there, finding receptive minds. We're in Phase 2 now. The hum-touched, as I call them, are being instructed to build a network of relays. To strengthen the signal, to make it denser, more powerful. To catch everyone else who isn't tuned in yet. A world where every home becomes a node in a network designed to erase the people inside it. The scale of it was dizzying. But why? I asked, the question feeling small and foolish. What's the point? I don't think why is a question it would understand, she said, her gaze distant. Is there a why to a crystal forming? Is there a why to a fungus spreading through a forest floor? It's a new form of organization. A new kind of consciousness, maybe. And it's using our civilization's tools to override us. Our meeting with Akari gave me a new, terrifying framework, but it also made the stakes terrifyingly real. My paranoia was no longer just a feeling, it was a survival instinct. Akari and I kept in contact through encrypted messaging apps, sharing observations, trying to map the spread. We were 2 lonely data points in a global pandemic of reality. The escalation came faster than we predicted. The hum itself began to change. The simple da-da-dum was still the bedrock, the carrier signal, but now, more complex layers were being woven into it. Sometimes it sounded almost musical, a series of discordant but structured harmonies. Other times, it felt like language, fast and chittering, just on the edge of my perception. It was evolving. The behavior of the hum-touched grew more coordinated. One afternoon, standing on a crowded crossroads in Shinsaibashi, the pedestrian light turned green. The massive crowd surged forward. And then, halfway across the street, they stopped. All of them. Hundreds of people, frozen in place. For a full 3 seconds, there was an unearthly silence. And then, as one, they all turned their heads slightly to the left, towards a massive digital billboard advertising a new smartphone. The billboard was on a standby screen, displaying only the company logo. But I could feel the hum pouring from it, a silent scream of data. Then, just as suddenly as they stopped, they continued walking, a seamless river of humanity once more. No one screamed. No one seemed to notice that they had just been part of a flash mob conducted by an invisible puppeteer. I stood frozen on the corner, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. The most devastating blow came a week later. I hadn't heard from Akari in 48 hours. Our usual check-ins were hourly. My frantic messages went unread. My calls went straight to a dead tone. Driven by a terrible certainty, I took the train to Kobe, to the address she had reluctantly given me. It was a modern apartment complex near the harbor. I managed to slip in behind a resident and found her floor. The door to her apartment was unlocked. I pushed it open. Akari. The air inside was thick and humming. It vibrated with a power that made the fillings in my teeth ache. Her apartment was a chaotic workshop, far more advanced than my neighbor's. Wires snaked across the floor, connecting laptops, audio synthesizers, and oscilloscopes, all of them lit up, their screens displaying the complex, layered waveform of the new hum. And in the center of the room, on a metal workbench, was her device. It was beautiful and terrible. A crystalline lattice of copper and silver, glowing faintly with a cool, blue light. It was humming not with the raw sound of electricity, but with a pure, resonant tone. A perfect, harmonic note. It was finished. Akari was sitting on the floor beside it. Her back was to me. She was cross-legged, perfectly still. Her hands rested on her knees, palms up. The tote bag with the band logo was on the floor beside her. "Akari," I whispered, my voice breaking. She didn't turn. But she spoke, her voice a monotone, devoid of all the fear and intelligence and life it had held in the cafe. "It's so clear now," she said, her voice harmonizing with the hum of the device. "The architecture is beautiful. We were so worried about the why. There is no why. There is only the pattern. The building. The glorious, silent symphony." She had not been taken. She had crossed over. The researcher had become the specimen. She had gotten too close, listened too intently, and the signal she had tried so hard to understand had finally made her understand. I backed away slowly, out of the apartment, pulling the door shut. I ran from the building, from the city of Kobe. My temporary alliance shattered, my last hope extinguished. I was alone again, but it was worse now. I knew what we were up against. It wasn't an enemy. It was a replacement. And its network was almost complete. The whole world was a circuit board, and the final components were being slotted into place. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The city had become a hostile territory. Every flickering neon sign, every passing train, every person staring into their phone was a potential threat, a node in the ever-expanding network. Akari's fate was a stark warning. To understand the hum was to be consumed by it. My isolation was no longer just a psychological state, it was my only defense. My ignorance, my fear, my very human fallibility, these were my shield. But I couldn't stay in my apartment forever. Morita-san's device on the balcony next door was now complete. It looked identical to Akari's, a silent, intricate sculpture of metal and wire. At night, it sometimes pulsed with a soft, internal light, in perfect synchrony with other, distant lights I could now see winking on balconies across the city. They were talking to each other. The network was live. The air in my apartment felt thick, charged with the energy they were channeling. It was getting harder to think. The simple, seductive logic of the pattern was always there at the edge of my thoughts, a promise of peace, of purpose. I had to get out. Not just my apartment, but Osaka. Maybe Japan. I had to find somewhere the grid was weaker, somewhere quiet. A rural town, a remote island. Somewhere the signal couldn't reach, or was at least faint enough to ignore. My escape plan was simple and desperate. I packed a single backpack with my passport, my remaining cash, and a few clothes. No electronics. Not even a watch. I would leave in the dead of night, walk to a station further down the line, and take the first Shinkansen, the bullet train, heading west, as far as it would go. But as I stood in my silent, dark room, I knew I couldn't just leave. It felt like cowardice. I had a horrifying, compulsive need to see the heart of it. To confront the thing that was unmaking my world. It was a foolish, suicidal impulse, but it was mine. All my other actions had been reactions. This would be a choice. I thought of the place in Osaka that represented the pinnacle of its modern ambition, a giant, gleaming structure that scraped the sky and was wired with more technology than any other building I knew, the Umeda Sky Building. 2 towers joined at the top by a floating garden observatory. A massive antenna piercing the clouds. If there was a focal point in this city, a place where the hum would be strongest, it would be there. I took the last train to Umeda. The station was a cathedral of the hum. The glowing signs, the ticket gates, the information displays, they all pulsed with it. The people moved with a strange, fluid grace, a collective organism navigating its environment. A few of them, the fully untouched, stood still against pillars, their heads cocked, their faces serene. They were the keepers of the new faith, listening to their silent sermons. I kept my head down, a ghost moving through a world that was no longer mine. The observatory was nearly empty at this late hour. A few couples stood by the windows, looking out at the glittering carpet of Osaka's lights. I walked to the edge, the city sprawling beneath me like a vast circuit board. The wind whipped around the open-air deck, but it couldn't drown out the sound. Here, at the top of the world, the hum was no longer a sound. It was everything. It wasn't in my ears, it was in my bones, in the fluid of my eyes, in the electrical signals of my own nervous system. It was a torrent of pure information, and for a terrifying, seductive moment, I let the floodgates open. I didn't hear a language, I felt it. I felt the sublime, crystalline logic of the pattern. It was a blueprint. The design for a structure so vast and complex it would dwarf any human creation. A silent, interconnected consciousness of matter and energy. I saw the people below not as individuals, but as willing hands, neurons in a new, planetary brain. Their small, selfish anxieties washed away by the tide of a magnificent, shared purpose. There was no malice in it. A spider doesn't hate the fly, it simply uses it to build its web. We were the raw material. Our civilization, our technology, our very bodies were the silk. And it was beautiful. For a split second, I understood Akari's final words. The urge to give in, to lay down the burden of my name, my memories, my fear, and simply become a part of the grand design was overwhelming. It was the promise of an end to loneliness. A perfect, harmonious belonging. I saw a face in the reflection of the glass. Not mine. It was Yumi, my old colleague. She was standing a few feet away, her back to me, looking out at the city. Her hands were resting on the railing, her fingers tapping out a complex, polyrhythmic beat. Tap tap long tap. Tap long tap. Tap tap. She wasn't just humming the tune anymore, she was performing a symphony. Her face, illuminated by the city lights below, was utterly peaceful. The kind, worried friend was gone, replaced by a contented component. That vision, the memory of her real smile, the one that didn't reach her eyes the last time we spoke, was the anchor that saved me. My fear, my anger, my grief for the world that was being erased, they were ugly, messy, human emotions. But they were mine. The signal offered unity and purpose, but the price was the self. I chose the self. I ripped my gaze away from the city, stumbled back from the railing, my head screaming as I shut out the signal. The feeling was of tearing myself away from a powerful magnet. I staggered towards the exit, blind and deaf to everything but the frantic need to escape. I didn't stop running until I was blocks away, lost in the labyrinth of Yumida's backstreets. I didn't know if anyone had tried to stop me. I didn't care. I made it to Shinosaka Station just before dawn and bought a ticket for the first train to Fukuoka, a city I had never visited, on the southern island of Kyushu. Now, I sit on the Shinkansen as it slices through the Japanese countryside at impossible speeds. The landscape is a green blur of rice paddies and mountains. It should be peaceful. But the hum is here, too. It's fainter, a low thrum in the carriage's climate control system, a subtle vibration in the seat beneath me. I can't unhear it. I will never be able to unhear it. My brief communion with it at the top of the tower changed me. I am no longer just a listener, I am a receiver that has been calibrated. I know what the pattern means. The woman sitting across the aisle from me is asleep, her head resting against the window. She's a stranger, maybe in her 50s, wearing a simple dress. And in her sleep, her lips are parted slightly. A sound is coming from them. A quiet, almost inaudible hum. Da-da-dum. Pause. Da-da-dum. I look away, out the window, but I can't escape the reflection. My own haunted face staring back at me, superimposed over the fleeing landscape. I have escaped the epicenter, but the contagion is in the air, in the wires, in the blood. It is quiet. It is patient. And it is everywhere. I am not a survivor. I am just a man who knows the song that is playing at the end of the world, running out of places to hide from the music. The unseeing. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. It began, as I suppose these things must, with bread. A Saturday morning ritual, immutable as the grey Dublin sky. Walk from my flat in Portobello, down the canal where the swans glide with regal indifference, and onto Camden Street. Past the pub still exhaling the ghost of last night's revelry, past the curated chaos of vintage shops, to the unassuming green frontage of O'Malley's family bakery. For 15 years, since I'd first moved to the city, my Saturdays had been anchored by the acquisition of an O'Malley's sourdough. A proper loaf, with a crust that fought back and a crumb that was a universe of tangy, yeasty complexity. It was a tangible link to a Dublin I feared was vanishing, a city of craft and heritage being papered over with glass-fronted burrito bars and international coffee chains. I'm a librarian. My life is an exercise in preservation, a quiet battle against the erosion of time and memory. O'Malley's was part of that battle. That particular Saturday, the bell above the door chimed its familiar, tinny welcome. The air was thick with the holy trinity of smells, yeast, sugar, and melting butter. Racks of Vienna rolls gleamed under the warm lights. Flour-dusted barmbrack sat in dense, fruity piles. And there, on the cooling rack, was my sourdough. I picked one up. It was warm, the heat seeping through the thin paper bag into my palm. A good omen. Maeve was behind the counter, polishing the glass of the pastry case. She was a university student, working here since she was 16. I knew she was studying history at Trinity. We'd had long chats about the Easter Rising and the architecture of the GPO. "Morning, Maeve," I said, placing the loaf on the worn wooden counter. She didn't look up. She kept polishing, her movements rhythmic, her gaze fixed on a spot just to the left of my head. A middle-aged woman in a canary-yellow coat squeezed past me, laying a bag of scones on the counter. "Just these for me, love," the woman said, her voice bright. Maeve finally looked up, her eyes sliding right over me, right through me, and landing on the woman. "Grand, Mrs. Doyle. That'll be $4.50. I stood there, loaf in hand, a pillar of invisible air. It was bizarre. Had I spoken too quietly? I cleared my throat. "And this sourdough, please, Maeve." "Nothing." She took Mrs. Doyle's money, her hand brushing the space where my loaf sat, and gave her change. They exchanged pleasantries about the abysmal weather. I felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. It was like being the new kid in the schoolyard again, ignored by the cool kids. I was a 38-year-old man, for God's sake. I pushed the loaf forward a little more. "Maeve?" I said, my voice louder now, a little strained. She turned, her gaze sweeping the counter. Her eyes were not hostile or dismissive. They were simply blank. As if the space I occupied, the loaf I held, the sound I made, were all data points her brain had chosen to filter out. She picked up her cloth and started wiping down the counter again, her hand passing within an inch of mine. Panic, cold and absurd, pricked at me. I fumbled in my pocket for a €5 note, dropped it on the counter next to the till, and backed away. "Keep the change," I muttered to the empty air. I felt like a thief, stealing something that was being freely offered, yet entirely unattainable. As I pushed the door open, the bell jangled my retreat. No one looked up. The smell of baking bread followed me out into the street, a phantom limb of a transaction that never happened. I tried to rationalize it on the walk home. She was exhausted. Hungover, maybe. It's a student job. I was probably mumbling. People are so distracted these days, always half somewhere else. I'd seen it in the library a dozen times, people walking into shelves, lost in their phones. But this felt different. It wasn't distraction. It was a complete and total lack of registration. The following Tuesday, at work, I mentioned it to Sierra, my colleague at the cataloging desk. We shared a cynical but comfortable friendship, built on a mutual appreciation for silence and a distaste for loud patrons. Had the weirdest experience at O'Malley's on Saturday, I began, sorting through a stack of new acquisitions. It was like I was a ghost. Maeve, the girl who works there, looked right through me. Sierra paused, a book on medieval monasticism held aloft. She frowned, a little crease appearing between her meticulously plucked eyebrows. O'Malley's? On Camden Street? That's the one. Owen, are you sure? She said, her tone shifting from casual to concerned. That place closed down ages ago. Must be 5, 6 years now. It's a vape shop. I stared at her. What? No, it isn't. I was just there.